You want to see a duke burn his empire to ashes? Watch what happens when one letter slips from a man's pocket and unravels a decade of silence. This isn't some fairy tale about redemption. It's about the kind of guilt that eats you alive from the inside out, the kind that makes you dangerous. Stay until the end. You'll understand why some secrets should stay buried. The grand staircase of Blackthorn Palace had witnessed 3 generations of Ravenshire's descend in glory, but tonight it bore Adrian Ravenshire like a man walking to his own execution. Snow hammered against the towering windows, each gust rattling the ancient glass in its lead frames. The winter ball was in full scream below, champagne flowing, laughter echoing off marble columns, the string quartet sawing through some Viennese waltz that made Adrian's teeth ache. He hated these performances, the painted smiles, the careful choreography of aristocratic bullshit where everyone pretended the Ravenshire name still meant something other than blood money and buried bodies. His hand gripped the mahogany banister hard enough to leave marks. The wood was cold under his palm, polished to a mirror shine by servants who wouldn't meet his eyes. They never did anymore. Fear had that effect. It made you invisible to everyone except your enemies. Adrian Ravenshire, Duke of Blackthorn, 32 years old and already a ghost haunting his own inheritance. He descended slowly, each step measured, his black evening coat immaculate, his cravat knotted with the precision of a noose. Everything about him radiated control, the kind of control that came from years of keeping your demons locked behind your ribs where no one could see them scream. His dark hair was swept back from a face too sharp to be handsome, too cruel to be kind. Women still watched him, though. They always did. Something about danger dressed in expensive fabric made them stupid. The ballroom opened below, like the mouth of hell. 300 guests glittering under chandeliers that cost more than most villages. Every face turned toward him as he descended, and Adrian felt their stares like insects crawling across his skin. They wanted the show. The infamous Duke, the man who'd lost his fiancée under mysterious circumstances 9 years ago, who'd turned Blackthorn into a fortress of silence and suspicion. They came to his balls the way people attended public hangings, for the spectacle. Halfway down the staircase, Adrian's coat caught on something. He tugged once, impatient, and heard the soft tear of fabric against a protruding nail in the banister. His jaw tightened. The servants would pay for that. Not him directly. He didn't soil his hands with discipline anymore. But his brother Cedric would handle it with his usual efficiency. Cedric was good at making problems disappear. Adrian continued his descent, unaware that the tear had done more than damage his coat. A sealed letter, folded small and tucked deep in his inner pocket, had slipped free and tumbled onto the crimson runner covering the marble steps. It landed without sound, swallowed by the noise rising from below. He reached the ballroom floor and the performance began. Lord Whitmore approached first, his face flushed with wine and false warmth. They shook hands, exchanged pleasantries about the weather, about Parliament, about nothing that mattered. Adrian's responses were automatic, his mind elsewhere, cataloging exits and counting minutes until he could retreat to his study and the silence that was the only honest thing left in his life. Across the ballroom, he caught sight of his brother. Cedric stood near the far wall, surrounded by a circle of admirers, his golden hair catching the light, his smile easy and warm. Everything Adrian wasn't. Cedric was the charming one, the diplomatic one, the Ravenshire who made people forget about scandals and whispers. He was also a liar, a manipulator, and quite possibly a murderer, but nobody seemed to notice that part. Charm had a way of blinding people to the monster underneath. Their eyes met across the crowd. Cedric raised his glass in a small salute, his smile never wavering. Adrian didn't return the gesture. He turned away and moved toward the edge of the room, seeking shadows, seeking escape from the suffocating pageantry. That's when he felt it. The absence. His hand went instinctively to his inner pocket, pressing against his ribs where the letter should have been. Nothing. The pocket was empty. His blood went cold. Not fear. Adrian had burned through fear years ago, but something sharper. Calculation. Consequence. That letter was his insurance policy, his proof, the only thing keeping him alive in a house full of knives aimed at his back. And now it was gone. He kept his face blank, a skill honed through years of necessity. No one could see panic. No one could smell weakness. He scanned the ballroom once more, slower this time, searching for anyone watching him too closely, anyone who looked satisfied. Nothing. Just the usual parade of peacocks and parasites. The letter had to be in the palace somewhere. If it had fallen during his descent, it would still be on the staircase. Simple. Recoverable. He would retrieve it after the guests cleared, burn it, and find a better hiding place. This was manageable. Adrian moved toward the refreshment table, maintaining the appearance of casual movement while his mind raced through scenarios. Who knew about the letter? No one. Who suspected? Everyone. That was the problem with living in a house built on secrets. Suspicion became the architecture. He reached for a glass of champagne he wouldn't drink when a voice cut through the noise. Your Grace. Adrian turned. His niece's governess stood 3 feet away, her face pale, her hands clasped in front of her like a penitent before an altar. What was her name? Carrington. Evelyn Carrington. He'd hired her 3 months ago to educate little Margaret after the previous governess had quit without explanation, or been paid to leave. Cedric handled those arrangements. Miss Carrington, his voice was flat, dismissive. You're not required at these functions. I know, Your Grace. I was returning from the library when I... She hesitated, and something in that pause made Adrian's attention sharpen. I found something on the staircase. I believe it belongs to you. The world narrowed to the space between them. Adrian's expression didn't change, but inside his chest something ancient and violent woke up. Did you? It wasn't a question. Evelyn's hands tightened around each other, knuckles going white, but she didn't look away. That was interesting. Most people couldn't hold his gaze for more than a few seconds before their nerve broke. A letter, Your Grace. It was sealed, but another pause. Longer this time. The seal was damaged when I picked it up. There it was. The confession wrapped in careful language. She'd opened it. She'd read it. This quiet little governess with her drab dress and her downcast demeanor had just become the most dangerous person in Blackthorn Palace. Where is it now? Adrian kept his voice low, conversational. Around them, the ball continued its oblivious rotation. In my quarters, Your Grace. I thought it best to keep it safe until I could return it to you privately. Smart. Dangerously smart. She understood the implications. She understood that whatever words were written on that paper could get them both killed. Adrian studied her face. Mid-20s, he guessed. Plain features made plainer by exhaustion and cheap fabric. But her eyes, gray-blue, steady despite the fear bleeding through at the edges, those eyes had intelligence. Calculation. She wasn't some simpering fool who'd stumbled into disaster. She'd recognized the danger and made a choice. Come with me, he said. Your Grace, the ball, now. The command cut through her protest. Evelyn swallowed hard but nodded, following as Adrian moved toward the service corridor that led away from the ballroom. He didn't look back to see if she obeyed. She would. They always did when he used that tone. Fear was a language everyone spoke fluently in Blackthorn. They walked in silence through narrow hallways where servants pressed themselves against walls to let them pass. Adrian moved quickly, his longer stride forcing Evelyn to half-run behind him. Good. Keep her off balance. Keep her scared. Scared people made mistakes, and he needed to know exactly what kind of threat she represented. He led her to his private study on the 2nd floor, a room he kept locked except when occupied. The space smelled of leather and old smoke, the walls lined with books no one read anymore. The massive oak desk covered in correspondence he ignored. A fire burned low in the grate, casting shadows that moved like living things across the floor. Adrian closed the door behind them and turned the lock. The click echoed. Evelyn flinched. Your Grace, what did it say? Not a question, a demand. Evelyn's breath came faster now, her chest rising and falling beneath the high collar of her governess dress. She was afraid. Good. She should be. I shouldn't have read it, she said. I know that, but the seal was broken and I saw a name. What name? Rosalie Whitmore. The room went silent except for the crack and pop of the dying fire. Adrian felt something behind his sternum twist, hot and vicious. The old wound that never healed no matter how many years passed. And what, he said slowly, did my former fiancé's name compel you to read further? Evelyn met his eyes, and Adrian saw the exact moment she decided to stop pretending to be helpless. Because everyone says she died in an accident, Evelyn said, but the letter suggests otherwise. There it was, the truth pulled out into the light where it could do maximum damage. Adrian moved closer, using his height as a weapon, forcing Evelyn back until her shoulders hit the bookshelf behind her. You don't know what you've stepped into, he said, his voice dropping to something barely above a whisper. That letter is a death sentence. For you, for me, for anyone foolish enough to read it. Then why keep it? Evelyn's voice shook, but she didn't look away. Why carry proof of something that could destroy you? Because, Adrian said, it's the only thing keeping my brother from killing me. The confession hung between them, raw and dangerous. Adrian watched understanding dawn across Evelyn's face, the pieces falling into place, the full scope of the nightmare she'd wandered into. She should run. She should tear up the letter and disappear into the night before Cedric realized she existed. But she didn't move. The letter mentions a child, Evelyn said quietly. Rosalie was pregnant when she died. When she was murdered. The word landed like a blade. Evelyn's face went pale. By whom? Adrian smiled, and it was not a kind expression. By the man who stands to inherit everything if I die without an heir, by the golden son everyone adores. By my brother, Lord Cedric. Lord Cedric, Adrian confirmed. Who discovered that Rosalie was carrying my child? Who realized that a legitimate heir would destroy his plans? Who arranged an accident that left her body broken at the bottom of the East Tower stairs? Evelyn's hand went to her mouth. My God. There is no God in Blackthorn, Adrian said flatly. There's only survival and the price you're willing to pay for it. He turned away, moving to the window that overlooked the snow-buried gardens. His reflection stared back at him from the dark glass. A man hollowed out by grief and guilt, a duke who'd spent 9 years drowning in silence because speaking the truth would mean war with his own blood. You want to know why I kept the letter? Adrian's voice was rough, stripped of its usual cold control. Because Rosalie wrote it the night before she died. Because she knew someone was going to kill her and she needed proof to survive. Because she trusted me to protect our child and I failed. The child survived? Adrian's jaw tightened. Hidden, safe, away from this cesspool of corruption and murder. I made sure of that much, at least. He turned back to face Evelyn, and something in his expression made her press harder against the bookshelf. You should have burned the letter the moment you realized what it was, he said. You should have pretended you never saw it. Now you're caught in the same trap that killed Rosalie. Why haven't you exposed him? Evelyn's voice was barely audible. If you have proof... Proof? Adrian laughed, bitter and sharp. You think proof matters when you're accusing one of the most beloved men in English society? Cedric has spent 9 years building his reputation, while I've become the monster everyone expects. Who do you think they'll believe? He was right, and they both knew it. The beautiful lie always won over the ugly truth. Evelyn straightened slowly, pulling herself away from the bookshelf, and something shifted in her posture. The fear was still there. Adrian could see it in the tension around her mouth, the white-knuckle grip of her hands, but underneath it, something harder, something that looked dangerously like determination. Then what's your plan? She asked. Keep the letter hidden and hope your brother doesn't kill you first? My plan, Adrian said coldly, is to survive long enough to see that child reach majority and claim their inheritance. After that, I don't particularly care what happens to me. That's not a plan. That's suicide with extra steps. The bluntness shocked him. Adrian stared at this quiet governess, who'd somehow found a spine in the last 5 minutes. What would you suggest, Miss Carrington? That I march into the ballroom and announce my brother's crimes? That I produce a 9-year-old letter and expect justice? I suggest, Evelyn said carefully, that you stop acting like a martyr and start acting like someone who wants to win. Adrian felt something dangerous stir in his chest. Anger, maybe, or something worse, hope. Give me the letter, he said. No. The refusal hung in the air between them. Adrian's eyes narrowed. Excuse me? I said no. Evelyn's voice was stronger now, fed by whatever reckless courage had seized her. You've spent 9 years hiding that letter and it's accomplished nothing. Your brother is still free. Rosalie is still dead. Her child is still in exile. Maybe it's time for a different approach. And what approach would that be? Find more proof. Build a case that can't be ignored. Use me. Adrian went very still. Use you. I'm nobody, Evelyn said. A governess. Invisible. I can move through this house and nobody notices. I can listen, observe, gather information. Your brother doesn't see me as a threat. He will the moment he realizes you know anything. Then we make sure he doesn't realize. Evelyn stepped forward, closing the distance between them, and Adrian saw the desperation bleeding through her determined facade. You said you failed to protect Rosalie. Don't fail again. It was a low blow, and they both knew it. Adrian's hands curled into fists at his sides, every instinct screaming at him to throw this foolish woman out of his study and burn the letter himself. But underneath the anger, underneath the reflexive need to protect his secrets, something else stirred. Something that had been dead for 9 years. The will to fight back. You have no idea what you're volunteering for, Adrian said quietly. If Cedric suspects you know anything, he won't hesitate. He'll make it look like an accident, a fall, a robbery gone wrong. He's good at that. I know. You could die. I know that too. Evelyn's gray-blue eyes held his, unflinching. But doing nothing guarantees we all lose. At least this way, there's a chance. Adrian studied her face, looking for the crack, the moment when self-preservation would override foolish courage. He didn't find it. This woman was either incredibly brave or catastrophically stupid, and he hadn't decided which yet. You understand that if we do this, if I agree to this insanity, there's no going back. You become part of this war. You become a target. I became a target the moment I opened that letter, Evelyn said. At least this way I'm fighting instead of waiting to be eliminated. Adrian turned back to the window, his mind racing through scenarios, calculating odds, measuring risks against potential gains. It was a terrible plan. It would probably get them both killed, but it was more than he'd had 5 minutes ago, which was nothing but slow suffocation and eventual murder. He made his decision. Keep the letter hidden, Adrian said without turning around. Somewhere Cedric won't think to look. And start paying attention to the servants' gossip. They see everything in this house. You're agreeing. I'm agreeing that doing nothing hasn't worked. Adrian's reflection in the glass looked older than 32, worn down by years of grief and rage. But understand this, Miss Carrington. The moment you become more liability than asset, I will cut you loose. I won't sacrifice myself to save you. I wouldn't expect you to. He turned to face her one more time. Tomorrow, come to my niece's lessons as usual. Act as though nothing has changed. Can you do that? Yes, Your Grace. And Miss Carrington, Adrian's voice dropped to something dark and dangerous. If you're playing some game of your own, if this is blackmail or manipulation or any other scheme, I will end you, accident or not. Do we understand each other? Evelyn's face went pale, but she nodded. Perfectly, Your Grace. Good. Now get out before someone notices you've been in here. She left quickly, the door closing behind her with a soft click. Adrian stood alone in his study, listening to the distant sounds of the ball continuing without him, and wondered if he just made the smartest decision of his life or signed both their death warrants. Probably both. He moved to his desk and poured 3 fingers of whiskey into a crystal glass, drinking it in one smooth motion that burned all the way down. The alcohol did nothing to quiet the noise in his head, the what-ifs and the calculations, the memories of Rosalie's face when she'd told him about the baby, the weight of 9 years spent drowning in guilt and inaction. A quiet governess with intelligent eyes had just challenged him to be something other than a ghost haunting his own inheritance. Adrian wasn't sure if he still remembered how to be that man, wasn't sure if that man had ever existed outside Rosalie's imagination. But he knew one thing with absolute certainty. Cedric would kill again to protect his secrets. And now there were 2 people in Blackthorn Palace who knew the truth. The war had finally begun. 3 floors below, in the cramped governess quarters tucked into the servants' wing, Evelyn Carrington sat on the edge of her narrow bed with her hands shaking so badly she had to clasp them together to make them stop. What had she done? The letter lay hidden beneath her mattress, the paper thin as a whisper, the words burned into her memory. She'd meant to return it immediately. She'd meant to stay invisible, keep her head down, collect her wages, and disappear back into the anonymous masses where governesses belonged. That was the plan. That was survival. But then she'd read the letter. Read Rosalie Whitmore's desperate account of discovering she was pregnant, of overhearing Lord Cedric talking about eliminating obstacles, of her terror that she would die before anyone knew the truth. The handwriting had been shaky, written by someone who knew they were running out of time, and at the bottom, a single line that had broken Evelyn's heart. Adrian, if you're reading this, I'm already dead. Don't let our child pay for my mistakes, please. Evelyn pressed her hands to her face, feeling the tears she'd been holding back finally break free. She didn't cry for herself. She'd run out of self-pity years ago, used it all up during the slow decline of her family's fortune, the death of her parents, the desperate scramble for employment that had landed her in Blackthorn. No, she cried for Rosalie, for the Duke who'd become a monster trying to survive his grief, for the child who'd been exiled from their own inheritance. She cried because the world was so catastrophically unfair, and she'd just volunteered to fight a battle she couldn't possibly win. But she'd do it anyway, because walking away meant Cedric won. It meant Rosalie died for nothing. It meant every whispered rumor about the tragic accident was actually a carefully constructed lie, and Evelyn had spent too many years being lied to by powerful men to stomach one more. A soft knock on her door made her freeze. Her heart hammered against her ribs. "Who is it?" "Margaret, miss. I can't sleep." Evelyn exhaled, relief flooding through her. Just the child, just her student. She wiped her eyes quickly and opened the door. Margaret Ravenshire stood in the hallway in her nightgown, blonde hair tumbling around her shoulders, her face uncertain. She was 7 years old, the daughter of the Duke's deceased younger brother, an orphan raised in Blackthorn's cold embrace. "Come in, sweetheart," Evelyn said, pulling the girl into her room and closing the door. "What's wrong?" "The ball is too loud," Margaret said, climbing onto Evelyn's bed without invitation. "And Uncle Adrian looked angry on the stairs. Is he angry at me?" "No, darling, your uncle isn't angry at you." "He's always angry," Margaret said matter-of-factly. "Cook says he's been angry since Lady Rosalie died. She says he loved her very much." Evelyn's throat tightened. "Yes, I think he did. Uncle Cedric says Uncle Adrian should marry again. He says the family needs heirs." Margaret picked at the quilt, not meeting Evelyn's eyes. "But I heard Uncle Cedric tell someone that Uncle Adrian is too damaged to love anyone now." The casual cruelty of that assessment hit Evelyn like a physical blow, damaged, as if grief were a broken bone that healed wrong. "Your Uncle Cedric doesn't know everything," Evelyn said carefully. Margaret looked up, her blue eyes too knowing for 7 years old. "Do you like Uncle Adrian, Miss Carrington?" The question caught her off guard. I don't know him well enough to say." "I think he's sad," Margaret said. "Really, really sad. The kind of sad that makes you mean so people stay away." Out of the mouths of babes. Evelyn pulled the girl closer, wrapping an arm around her small shoulders. "Sometimes people are mean because they're protecting something," Evelyn said. "Sometimes being mean is the only way they know how to survive." Margaret nodded solemnly, as if this made perfect sense. They sat together in comfortable silence, listening to the distant music of the ball, two people caught in the orbit of men who played games with human lives. Finally, Margaret yawned. "Can I sleep here tonight, miss?" "Of course." Evelyn tucked the girl into her narrow bed, smoothing back her hair until Margaret's breathing deepened into sleep. Only then did she allow herself to pull out the letter one more time, unfolding it carefully in the candlelight. She read Rosalie's words again, looking for clues, for evidence, for anything that might help build the case Adrian needed. The letter mentioned specific dates, specific conversations, specific people who might have witnessed something. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Evelyn refolded the paper and hid it back beneath the mattress, then blew out the candle and lay down beside Margaret in the darkness. Tomorrow she would begin the most dangerous work of her life. Tomorrow she would start gathering the threads that might either weave justice or become a noose for both her and the Duke. Tonight, though, she would lie here and pretend she wasn't terrified. She would listen to a child breathe and remember why she'd made this choice. Because Margaret deserved to grow up in a world where murderers faced consequences. Because Rosalie's child deserved their inheritance. Because sometimes doing the right thing meant volunteering for the nightmare. Outside, snow continued to fall over Blackthorn Palace, burying everything in white silence. Inside, a governess and a duke had just declared war on one of the most dangerous men in England, and somewhere in the shadows, Cedric Ravenshire continued to smile, unaware that his carefully constructed empire, had just developed its first crack. The ball ended near dawn. The guests departed. The servants cleaned champagne stains from marble and carried exhausted nobility to waiting carriages. Adrian Ravenshire stood at his study window and watched the sun rise over his poisoned inheritance, and for the first time in 9 years, he let himself imagine what winning might look like. He let himself imagine justice. He let himself imagine Rosalie's ghost finally resting in peace. But ghosts don't rest in Blackthorn Palace. They wait. They watch. And they demand blood for blood, secret for secret, death for death. The Duke was about to learn that some wars don't end when you win. They end when everyone loses. The morning after the ball arrived with the kind of silence that comes before violence. Adrian stood at his study window watching servants clear snow from the courtyard paths, their movements mechanical, efficient, designed to be invisible. That was the currency of Blackthorn. Invisibility bought survival. Be seen, and you became a target. He hadn't slept. Sleep required letting your guard down, and Adrian had spent 9 years learning that unconsciousness was just another word for vulnerability. Instead, he'd sat at his desk going through correspondence he didn't care about, ledgers tracking money he didn't need, reports from estate managers who knew better than to expect responses. Busy work, the kind of mindless activity that kept your hands occupied while your brain churned through scenarios. The governess had changed everything. That was the problem with secrets. Once more than one person knew, they stopped being secrets and became weapons. A knock on the door pulled him from the window. Adrian didn't turn around. "Come in." The door opened, footsteps on hardwood. Adrian recognized the gate before the voice spoke. His brother moved through the world like he owned it, each step a declaration of entitlement. "You left early last night." Cedric's voice was warm honey over broken glass. The guests noticed. Adrian finally turned. His brother stood framed in the doorway, impeccably dressed despite the early hour, his golden hair catching the weak morning light. Everything about Cedric was calculated to inspire trust. The easy smile, the open posture, the way he made eye contact just long enough to seem sincere without crossing into threat. He'd spent years perfecting the performance. "I had business to attend to," Adrian said flatly. "At your own ball?" Cedric stepped into the study, closing the door behind him with a soft click that made Adrian's shoulders tense. "That's poor form, brother. People are starting to talk. People are always talking. That's what they do when they have nothing of substance in their lives." Cedric laughed, the sound genuine and warm and completely hollow. "There's the Adrian we all know and love. Bitter and dismissive. It's very on brand." Adrian moved to his desk, putting furniture between them. "Old habit. You didn't let predators get within striking distance if you could help it." "What do you want, Cedric? Can I visit my brother without needing something? You've never done anything without needing something, so save us both time and get to it." The warmth drained from Cedric's expression, replaced by something colder, sharper. For just a moment, Adrian saw the real man underneath the performance, the one who'd arranged an accident 9 years ago, the one who'd watched Rosalie's body carried away and felt nothing but satisfaction. "Fine," Cedric said. "I'm concerned about the governess." Adrian's face remained perfectly still. "What about her?" "She was seen entering your study last night, after you left the ballroom. The two of you were alone for nearly 20 minutes. So? So it looks improper." Cedric moved closer, his movements casual but deliberate. An impropriety reflects badly on the family, on Margaret, on everything we've worked to rebuild after Rosalie died. Adrian finished, his voice sharp enough to cut. "You can say her name. She won't rise from the grave to haunt you." Something flickered across Cedric's face. Annoyance, maybe, or calculation. "I'm not the one being haunted, brother. That's your specialty." Cedric stopped at the edge of the desk, his hands resting lightly on the polished wood. "I'm simply suggesting that if you need to address matters with the staff, you do so through the proper channels. Not by summoning young women to your private quarters in the middle of the night." "She returned something I'd dropped," Adrian said. The lie came easily. "Years of practice. It took 5 minutes." 20, Cedric corrected softly. "I had someone timing it." The admission hung in the air between them. Adrian felt the familiar weight of surveillance, the knowledge that every movement in Blackthorn was watched, recorded, weaponized. Cedric had eyes everywhere, servants on his payroll, guests who owed him favors. an entire network of informants who kept him apprised of anything that might threaten his position. "You're having me followed," Adrian said. "It wasn't a question. I'm protecting our family's interests." "There's a difference." "Is there?" Cedric's smile returned, but it didn't reach his eyes. "You've been erratic lately, withdrawn. There are concerns about your stability." "Concerns from whom?" "From people who care about this family's future. People who worry that your grief has made you unreliable." Adrian laughed, the sound harsh and ugly. "Unreliable. That's rich coming from you." Cedric's expression hardened. "Be very careful with your next words, brother." "Or what? You'll arrange another accident? Make me tumble down some stairs like Rosalie?" The temperature in the room dropped. Cedric went very still, his body coiled tight, and for a moment Adrian thought his brother might actually lunge across the desk. Violence was always just beneath Cedric's polished surface, waiting for an excuse. But the moment passed. Cedric exhaled slowly, his smile returning like nothing had happened. "Your paranoia is showing," he said lightly. "Rosalie fell. It was tragic, but it was an accident. The inquest confirmed it. The inquest you manipulated. The inquest that found no evidence of foul play." Cedric leaned forward, his voice dropping to something intimate and dangerous. "Let me be very clear, Adrian. I understand you're still grieving. I understand you're looking for someone to blame. But these accusations, these fantasies, they need to stop. For your own good." Adrian met his brother's eyes and saw nothing but cold calculation staring back. This was the man who'd killed Rosalie. This was the man who'd spent decades lying about it, who'd built an empire on stolen inheritance and murder, who'd smile while planning your death and make it look like mercy. "Get out of my study," Adrian said quietly. Cedric straightened. "As you wish. But Adrian? One more thing." "What?" "Fire the governess." The demand landed like a blow. Adrian's jaw tightened. "No." "No?" Cedric's eyebrows rose. "That wasn't a suggestion, brother. That was an instruction. And I'm the Duke of Blackthorn, not you, not yet. So when I say no, I mean no." Cedric studied him for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he smiled, that warm, charming smile that had fooled everyone for years. "Very well, keep your little governess. But know this, if she becomes a problem, I'll handle it, my way." He left without waiting for a response, the door closing behind him with the finality of a threat delivered. Adrian stood alone in his study, his hands gripping the edge of the desk hard enough to hurt, and knew that Cedric had just declared open season on Evelyn Carrington. The war wasn't coming. It was already here. Fog. Evelyn woke to Margaret shaking her shoulder, the child's face pale in the early morning light filtering through the single window. "Miss Carrington, someone's at the door." Evelyn sat up too quickly, her head spinning, momentarily disoriented. She'd barely slept, every sound in the night making her heart race, expecting Cedric's men to burst through the door. Paranoia or survival instinct, she couldn't tell the difference anymore. She crossed to the door and opened it a crack. A young maid stood in the hallway, her face carefully blank. "His Grace requires Miss Margaret in the breakfast room. Her lessons are canceled today." Evelyn's stomach dropped. "Why?" "I don't question His Grace's orders, miss. I just deliver them." The maid left. Evelyn turned to find Margaret watching her with those two knowing eyes. "Am I in trouble?" the girl asked. "No, sweetheart. I'm sure it's nothing." But Evelyn wasn't sure, not even close. She helped Margaret dress, braided her hair with shaking fingers, and walked her down to the breakfast room where Adrian waited. The Duke stood by the window, his posture rigid, his expression unreadable. "Margaret, go with Mrs. Crawford," he said without preamble. "She'll take you to the morning room." The housekeeper appeared from nowhere, leading the confused girl away. Adrian waited until the door closed before turning to face Evelyn. "My brother knows," he said without preamble. Evelyn's blood went cold. "Knows what?" "That I met with you last night. That we spoke privately for 20 minutes. He doesn't know about the letter yet, but he's suspicious, which means you're in danger. Then I'll leave. I'll pack my things and—" "No." Adrian crossed the room in 3 strides, moving into her space with the kind of intensity that made it hard to breathe. "If you run, he'll know something's wrong. He'll hunt you down and make sure you can't talk. So what do I do? You stay. You play your role as governess. You act as though nothing has changed. Adrian's voice was harsh, urgent. And you understand that from this moment forward, you're being watched. Everything you do, everywhere you go, every person you speak to, Cedric will know about it. Evelyn felt the walls closing in. This is insane. This is survival. Adrian's eyes burned into hers. You asked to help. This is what helping looks like. Fear, surveillance, the constant knowledge that one wrong move gets you killed. His words hit like physical blows, stripping away any romantic notions she'd had about uncovering the truth. This wasn't some adventure. This was real danger, real consequences, real death waiting in the shadows. I can still help, she said, hating how her voice shook. I can still gather information. Not yet. Adrian stepped back, putting distance between them. Right now you're too exposed. Cedric thinks you're a potential problem. We need him to dismiss you as irrelevant before you can move freely. How do we do that? Adrian's expression hardened. We give him what he wants. A scandal. Something that explains my attention to you and makes you seem harmless. Evelyn stared at him. What are you suggesting? Adrian moved to the door, checking the hallway before turning back. Tomorrow night, I'm hosting a small dinner. Selected guests. You'll serve as Margaret's companion at the children's table. At some point during the evening, I'll publicly reprimand you for some minor infraction. Harshly. In front of witnesses. You want to humiliate me. I want to make you invisible. If Cedric thinks you're just another servant I've bullied, he'll lose interest. Right now you're a mystery. Mysteries get investigated. But a humiliated governess? That's too boring to warrant attention. The cold calculation in his voice reminded Evelyn exactly who she was dealing with. A man who'd spent years playing survival games, who'd learned to weaponize everything, including other people's suffering. And after, she asked, after you've convinced your brother I'm irrelevant, then we start gathering evidence. Carefully, slowly, building a case that can't be dismissed. Adrian's voice dropped lower. But understand this, Miss Carrington. The moment you become more liability than asset, I will throw you to the wolves without hesitation. My priority is bringing Cedric down, not protecting you. The brutal honesty shouldn't have surprised her. This was the Duke everyone feared. Cold, ruthless, willing to sacrifice anything for his goals. And Evelyn had volunteered to become one of his chess pieces. I understand, she said. Do you? Because there's no walking away now. You're in this until it ends, one way or another. Their eyes met and held, and Evelyn saw something beyond the coldness. A desperate, cornered thing that had been fighting alone for too long. The Duke was drowning, and she'd just jumped into the water with him. Whether they'd pull each other to shore or sink together remained to be seen. Tomorrow night, then, she said. Adrian nodded. Return to your quarters. Avoid being alone anywhere in the palace. And Miss Carrington? Don't try to be brave. Brave people die quickly in Blackthorn. He left her standing in the breakfast room, her heart hammering against her ribs, the full weight of her situation crushing down on her shoulders. She'd thought she understood what she was volunteering for. She'd been catastrophically wrong. The dinner party arrived too quickly, as dreaded things always did. Evelyn dressed in her plainest gray dress, pulled her hair back severely, and tried to make herself as invisible as possible while shepherding Margaret to the dining room. 20 guests filled the space, their conversation a dull roar of aristocratic gossip and political maneuvering. Evelyn settled Margaret at a small table near the windows, away from the adults, and tried to disappear into the wallpaper. Across the room, Adrian presided over the head table with Cedric at his right hand. The brothers couldn't have looked more different. Adrian all sharp angles and barely contained violence, Cedric radiating warmth and charm. Every guest clearly preferred Cedric's company, their laughter louder when he spoke, their attention focused on him like flowers following the sun. The meal progressed through multiple courses. Evelyn kept her head down, helping Margaret with her food, pretending not to notice when Adrian's gaze swept across her and away as if she didn't exist. Then dessert arrived and everything went to hell. Adrian stood abruptly, his chair scraping against hardwood loud enough to silence the room. All conversation died. You, he said, pointing at Evelyn. Governess. Evelyn's heart stopped. This was the plan. This was what they'd agreed to. But knowing it was coming didn't make the public attention any less terrifying. Your Grace? Her voice came out small, uncertain. Perfect. Stand up when I'm speaking to you. Evelyn rose on shaking legs. Every eye in the room turned to her, 20 aristocratic faces watching with varying degrees of curiosity and disdain. "Did you think I wouldn't notice?" Adrian's voice carried across the room, cold and cutting. "Did you think I wouldn't see what you've been doing? Your Grace, I don't understand. Don't lie to me." Adrian moved around the table, stalking toward her with predatory focus. "You've been stealing from this household." The accusation hit like a slap. Evelyn's face went hot, humiliation burning through her chest. This wasn't the plan. He was supposed to reprimand her for some minor mistake, not accuse her of theft. "I haven't stolen anything," she said, her voice stronger now, fed by genuine outrage. "No? Then explain this." Adrian pulled something from his pocket and held it up, a small silver spoon, ornate and expensive. "This was found in your quarters during a routine inspection. That's not mine. I've never..." "Enough!" Adrian's voice cracked like a whip. "I won't have thieves in my house. You're dismissed, effective immediately. Pack your things and be gone before morning." The room erupted in murmurs. Margaret made a small sound of distress. Cedric watched from his seat with an expression of concerned sympathy that made Evelyn's skin crawl. "Your Grace, please," Evelyn said, hating how tears burned at the corners of her eyes. "This is a mistake. I would never..." "The mistake was hiring you in the first place." Adrian's face was stone, his eyes empty of anything resembling mercy. "Get out of my sight." He turned away, dismissing her with brutal finality. Evelyn stood frozen, humiliation and confusion warring in her chest. This wasn't what they'd discussed. This was too much, too public, too... Then she understood. Adrian hadn't just humiliated her. He'd fired her. He'd made her irrelevant and removed her from Blackthorn in one devastating performance, which meant either he'd panicked and decided she was too much of a liability, or this was an even deeper game than she'd realized. She left the dining room with as much dignity as she could salvage, Margaret's small cries of protest following her out. Her face burned, her hands shook, and the silver spoon accusation echoed in her head like an accusation she couldn't escape. Evelyn made it to her quarters before the tears came. She pressed her hands to her face, gasping for air, trying to process what had just happened. Fired. Accused of theft in front of witnesses, her reputation destroyed beyond repair. A soft knock interrupted her spiral. Evelyn froze. "Who is it?" "Someone who owes you an explanation." She opened the door to find Adrian standing in the hallway, his face still cold, but his eyes carrying something that might have been regret. "That wasn't the plan," Evelyn said, her voice raw. "No. It was better than the plan." Adrian stepped into her room without invitation and closed the door. Cedric was watching too carefully. The original plan wouldn't have been enough. "So you accuse me of theft. I gave you a reason to leave that protects you." Adrian's voice was low, urgent. "Cedric thinks you're disgraced and dismissed. He has no reason to pursue you further. You're free." The word landed hollow. Free. As if anything about this situation involved freedom. "What about the letter?" Evelyn demanded. "What about bringing your brother down? Was all of that just talk?" Adrian moved to the window, his back to her, shoulders tight with tension. "I underestimated how quickly Cedric would move. He had your room searched twice today. If you'd still had that letter, he would have found it," Evelyn finished. "Is that what this is? You're protecting yourself? I'm protecting both of us." Adrian turned to face her, and the rawness in his expression caught her off guard. "You don't understand what he's capable of, the things he's done. If he'd found that letter in your possession, you'd be dead by morning, and I couldn't stop it." The admission hung between them, stripped of pretense. This man who'd spent 9 years building walls had just confessed his own limitations. "So what now?" Evelyn asked quietly. "I leave, and you go back to drowning in your guilt while Cedric wins? You survive. That's what now. You take the severance pay I'll provide, you leave Blackthorn, and you build a life somewhere Cedric's reach doesn't extend. And Rosalie's child will inherit when the time is right." Adrian's voice was flat, drained of hope. "I'll make sure of it." "How? By hiding for the rest of your life? By letting your brother control everything while you slowly poison yourself with guilt?" The words were harsh, deliberately cruel, and Evelyn watched them hit their target. Adrian's jaw tightened, his hands curling into fists. "You don't know what you're talking about," he said quietly. "Don't I? You had one chance, one person willing to help you, and you threw it away because you're too afraid to actually fight." "I'm not afraid." "Yes, you are." Evelyn stepped closer, closing the distance between them. "You're terrified. Not of Cedric, of losing, of trying and failing and proving that Rosalie died for nothing." The air between them went electric. Adrian stared at her with something wild in his eyes, something desperate and furious and barely contained. "Get out," he said, his voice dangerous. "No." The refusal shocked them both. Evelyn's heart hammered, but she held her ground. "You want to protect me? Fine. Give me the tools to protect myself. Teach me how to move through your world without being seen. Show me how to gather information without leaving traces." Adrian's jaw worked, fury and something else warring across his features. "You're insane," he said. "Probably. But I'm also right. You can't do this alone anymore. You've tried for 9 years and it hasn't worked. So what are you suggesting? I disappear from Blackthorn tonight. Publicly. Disgraced. But I don't leave the estate." Evelyn's words came faster, the plan forming as she spoke. "There are abandoned servant quarters in the East Wing, rooms no one uses. I hide there, and at night when the house sleeps, I move. I listen. I gather evidence while everyone thinks I'm long gone." Adrian stared at her like she'd lost her mind. "You want to live in the walls of Blackthorn Palace like a ghost." "I want to become invisible." "Isn't that what you said? That invisible people survive?" The silence stretched between them, loaded with possibility and disaster. Adrian's expression shifted, calculation replacing fury. "It's a terrible plan," he said finally. "Do you have a better one?" "No. And that's the problem." Adrian exhaled, the sound harsh and defeated. "Fine. You want to play ghost? Then you'll do exactly as I say. No improvisation, no heroics. You follow my lead, or I'll drag you out of here myself." "Agreed." Adrian moved to the door, checking the hallway before turning back. "Pack your things. Make it look convincing. I'll arrange for you to be escorted off the grounds through the main entrance. But halfway down the drive, you'll slip away and double back through the north gardens. There's a service entrance that's rarely guarded after midnight. And then? Then you become a ghost. And pray Cedric never realizes you're still here." He left without another word, taking all the air in the room with him. Evelyn stood alone in her quarters, hands shaking, mind racing through everything that could go wrong. This was insane. This was suicide. This was the only option left. She began packing her meager belongings, making noise, ensuring anyone listening would hear a disgraced governess preparing to flee. But as she worked, she carefully separated out what she'd actually need. Dark clothes, soft-soled shoes, the letter hidden beneath her mattress. The letter. The thing that had started all of this. Rosalie's final words. Evelyn pulled it out one more time, reading the desperate handwriting by candlelight. "Adrian, if you're reading this, I'm already dead." "Not yet," Evelyn thought. "Not if I can help it." She tucked the letter inside her bodice, close to her heart where no search would find it, and finished packing her decoy bag. 2 hours later, a stern-faced footman arrived to escort her from the premises. They walked through silent hallways, past servants who wouldn't meet her eyes, down the grand staircase where this had all begun. The front doors of Blackthorn opened onto frozen darkness. Evelyn stepped out into the night, a disgraced governess fleeing in shame, and no one noticed when she never reached the main gates. No one saw her slip between the hedgerows and circle back toward the abandoned East Wing. By dawn, Evelyn Carrington had ceased to exist. In her place, a ghost began to haunt Blackthorn Palace, listening through walls, gathering secrets in the dark, slowly weaving the rope that would eventually hang a murderer. But ghosts have a way of becoming real, and real things bleed when cut. Sweet. 3 days passed. Adrian went through the motions of his life. Estate business, correspondence, dinners with guests he couldn't stand, while knowing that somewhere in his palace, a woman who should have run away was instead becoming something dangerous. A witness, a weapon, a liability he'd voluntarily created. Cedric seemed satisfied. The governess problem had been handled, his brother's brief aberration explained and contained. Life at Blackthorn returned to its normal cold efficiency. But Adrian felt the difference. Small things. A door left slightly ajar in the east wing, a candle stub that hadn't been there the night before. The faint scent of something that didn't belong in abandoned corridors. She was there, moving through his house like smoke, gathering evidence he prayed existed. On the fourth night, Adrian found the first message, a folded paper tucked between books in his private library, a place only he visited. He opened it carefully. The servants are talking. Lord Cedric pays 3 of them for information. Mrs. Crawford, Thomas the footman, and Sarah from the kitchen. They report your movements daily. Adrian stared at the note, written in Evelyn's careful handwriting, and felt ice slide down his spine. He'd suspected surveillance, but having it confirmed was something else. Cedric had eyes everywhere, which meant every conversation, every action, every moment of vulnerability was being cataloged and reported. He burned the note in the fireplace and wondered how long before Cedric realized the ghost in his walls was gathering teeth. On the 7th night, another message appeared, this one tucked under his desk blotter. Cedric received a visitor 3 nights ago, late. They argued in his study. I heard your name. I heard the word inheritance. I heard the visitor say, the child must never be found. Adrian's blood ran cold. Someone else knew about Rosalie's child, someone who wanted them eliminated. The endgame was accelerating. Cedric was tying up loose ends, which meant anyone connected to the truth was marked for death, including the governess currently living in his walls. Adrian grabbed paper and wrote quickly, get out, tonight, this is over, you've done enough. He left the note in the library, in the same spot where he'd found her messages, and waited. The next morning, it was gone. In its place, a new message. No, we're close. I can feel it. Trust me. Trust. The word felt foreign. Adrian hadn't trusted anyone since Rosalie died. Trust required vulnerability, and vulnerability meant death. But this woman had voluntarily locked herself in a cage with monsters for the chance at justice. That wasn't trust. That was something more dangerous. That was faith. Adrian burned her message and knew with absolute certainty that this would end badly. The only question was how many bodies would pile up before the truth finally emerged. In the walls of Blackthorn, Evelyn Carrington pressed her ear to cold stone and listened to murderers plan their next move. She was terrified. She was exhausted. She was more alive than she'd been in years, and somewhere in the dark, the ghosts of Blackthorn whispered their approval. Finally, someone was fighting back. Finally, someone refused to let the dead stay buried in silence. The war had moved from threats to action, and there was no turning back for any of them now. The breakthrough came on the 14th night, and it arrived in the form of blood. Evelyn had been living in the walls for 2 weeks, moving through abandoned corridors like something that had forgotten how to be human. She slept in stolen hours, ate scraps lifted from kitchen stores after midnight, and spent her nights pressed against cold stone listening to conversations that would get her killed if anyone discovered her presence. The isolation was eating her alive from the inside out, turning her thoughts strange and circular, but she couldn't stop now. Not when she was so close to something real. She'd mapped Cedric's movements, learned his patterns, identified which servants reported to him and which could be trusted. 3 names kept appearing in whispered conversations, Mrs. Crawford, Thomas, and Sarah. Adrian had been right about the surveillance, but there was a 4th name that appeared less frequently, always spoken in hushed tones that carried weight, a name that made even Cedric's paid informants nervous. Whitmore, not Rosalie, her father. Lord Edward Whitmore, the man whose daughter had died under mysterious circumstances 9 years ago. The man who'd accepted the inquest's findings without question and moved on with disturbing speed. Evelyn had assumed he'd been deceived, manipulated into believing the accident story. She'd been catastrophically wrong. The revelation came while she crouched in a narrow space between walls on the 3rd floor, her ear pressed against plaster, listening to Cedric's study through a crack in the wainscoting. She'd learned to control her breathing, to become so still that mice walked past her feet without noticing. Tonight, that skill saved her life. Cedric's voice came first, tight with irritation. You're taking unnecessary risks coming here. A second voice answered, older, rougher, around the edges. I wouldn't be here if you'd handled the situation properly. Evelyn's blood went cold. She knew that voice. Lord Whitmore, Rosalie's father. The man who should have been demanding justice for his daughter's murder was instead meeting secretly with her killer. The governess was a complication, Cedric said. She's been dealt with. Dealt with. Not eliminated. That concerns me. She was fired and humiliated in front of witnesses. She left the estate 3 days after the ball. She's irrelevant. A pause. Then Whitmore's voice came again, harder this time. And the letter? Evelyn stopped breathing. They knew about the letter. How did they know? Still missing, Cedric admitted. Adrian has it hidden somewhere. I've searched his quarters twice. Nothing. Then perhaps your brother is smarter than you give him credit for. The contempt in Whitmore's voice was palpable. Evelyn heard movement in the study, footsteps on hardwood, the clink of glass against glass as someone poured a drink. Adrian is many things, Cedric said carefully. Smart isn't one of them. He's held together by guilt and inertia. The moment he realizes what that letter actually proves, he'll crumble. Will he? Because from where I stand, your brother has survived 9 years of your attempts to break him. That requires a certain resilience. He survives because he's useful. The moment he stops being useful, you'll do what? Whitmore's voice cut like a razor. Kill him the way you killed my daughter? The silence that followed was deafening. Evelyn's heart hammered so hard she was certain they could hear it through the walls. That wasn't the plan, Cedric said finally. His voice had lost its warmth, replaced by something flat and dangerous. Rosalie was supposed to disappear quietly. The fall was an accident you arranged, an accident we both agreed was necessary. Whitmore, don't pretend you weren't part of this from the beginning. You're the one who came to me when you discovered your daughter was pregnant. You're the one who said she needed to be handled before the scandal destroyed both our families. Evelyn pressed her hand to her mouth to keep from making a sound. Rosalie's own father. Her own father had conspired in her murder. The betrayal was so massive, so incomprehensible, that for a moment Evelyn couldn't process it. I didn't tell you to push her down the stairs, Whitmore said coldly. I told you to pay her off, send her away, make the problem disappear without violence. She refused. Cedric's voice rose slightly, defensive now. She was going to expose everything, the bribes, the forged documents, the entire inheritance scheme. She had proof. She was going to ruin us both. So you killed her. So I protected our interests. There's a difference. The casual way Cedric spoke about murder made Evelyn's stomach turn. These men were discussing Rosalie's death the way other people discussed business arrangements, cold, calculated, devoid of anything resembling remorse. And the child? Whitmore asked. Have you located it? Not yet. Adrian hid the bastard well. But children leave traces. Birth records, baptisms. Someone knows where it is. Find it, soon. The longer that child exists, the more dangerous this situation becomes. I'm aware of the timeline. Are you? Because if that child reaches majority with proof of parentage, they inherit everything. Not you, not your carefully constructed empire. A 20-year-old bastard becomes the Duke of Blackthorn, and you become nothing. The threat hung in the air between them. Evelyn heard the clink of glass again, someone drinking, the creak of leather as someone settled into a chair. Why are you really here, Whitmore? Cedric's voice had shifted, become softer, more dangerous. You didn't come just to question my competence. I came because there are rumors, whispers. People are starting to ask questions about Rosalie's death again. What people? People at court. People with influence. Someone has been making inquiries. Discreet ones. But inquiries nonetheless. Silence. Then Cedric spoke, each word carefully measured. Adrian. Perhaps. Or perhaps someone else has become curious. Either way, it's a problem. I'll handle it. See that you do. Because if this unravels, if anyone discovers the truth, we both hang. Not metaphorically, literally. They'll execute us for murdering a pregnant woman and orchestrating fraud on this scale. Evelyn's mind raced. The conspiracy was bigger than she'd imagined. Not just murder, fraud, bribery, forged documents. An entire inheritance scheme built on Rosalie's corpse. And Rosalie's own father was part of it. The voices continued, but Evelyn barely heard them. Her thoughts spun in circles, trying to piece together the full picture. Rosalie had discovered something, evidence of fraud or bribery or both. She'd threatened to expose it. So Cedric had killed her with her father's blessing, arranged it to look like an accident, and spent 9 years covering their tracks. But they'd missed something: the letter. And now that letter was the only thing standing between Adrian and death, between a murdered woman's child and their inheritance, between justice and complete catastrophic failure. Evelyn needed to tell Adrian, needed to warn him that the conspiracy ran deeper than either of them had suspected. But moving now would be suicide. She had to wait, had to let the meeting end and pray she could slip away undetected. She didn't get the chance. A hand clamped over her mouth from behind, yanking her backward. Evelyn tried to scream, but the sound was muffled against a rough palm. She was dragged away from the wall, into darkness, her feet scraping against dusty floorboards as someone impossibly strong hauled her deeper into the abandoned corridors. Terror blanked her mind. She thrashed, trying to break free, but her attacker was too powerful. They pulled her around a corner, through a narrow doorway, into a space so dark she couldn't see her own hands. Then the hand released her mouth, and a familiar voice hissed in her ear. "Are you trying to get yourself killed?" "Adrian." Evelyn spun around but couldn't see him in the absolute darkness. Her heart hammered, adrenaline still screaming through her veins. "How did you—" "I've been watching you for 3 days." Adrian's voice was barely a whisper. "You're not as invisible as you think." "I heard them." Evelyn's words tumbled out in a rush. "Cedric and Whitmore. Rosalie's father was part of it. He helped plan her murder. There's fraud, forged documents, something about an inheritance scheme." "I know." The 2 words hit like a slap. Evelyn went silent. "You know? I've known for 8 years. Adrian's voice was dead, drained of everything except exhaustion. "Why do you think I kept that letter? It doesn't just prove Rosalie was murdered, it proves why. It names every person involved in the conspiracy, including the man who should have protected his own daughter. Then why haven't you done anything? Because proving it would require allies I don't have, and political capital I've spent 9 years burning through." Adrian moved in the darkness, a shift of fabric, a whisper of breath. "The moment I accuse Whitmore, he'll destroy me. He has connections at court. He has the ear of people who matter. And I'm just the Mad Duke, who everyone already suspects killed his fiancée himself. So you've done nothing. I've kept that child alive." Adrian's voice hardened. "I've kept myself alive. I've made sure the evidence survived until someone could use it. That's not nothing. It's not enough." The accusation hung between them. Evelyn felt Adrian's presence shift again, coming closer, and suddenly his hand found her arm in the darkness. His grip was gentle, but insistent. "We need to leave. Now. If Cedric realizes someone was listening, he won't." I was careful. Careful doesn't matter if he decides to search the walls. Adrian pulled her forward, guiding her through pitch-black corridors with the confidence of someone who knew every inch of his prison. "Come on!" They moved through the abandoned sections of Blackthorn in complete silence, Adrian leading, Evelyn following, both of them acutely aware that discovery meant death. The palace was massive, built across 3 centuries, full of forgotten spaces and sealed-off rooms where secrets could hide forever. Adrian led her to a section she hadn't explored yet, up a narrow staircase that probably hadn't been used in decades. At the top, he pushed open a door that screamed on rusted hinges and pulled her into a room barely larger than a closet. "Where are we?" "The old chapel tower. No one comes here anymore." Adrian finally lit a candle, the flame guttering in drafts from broken windows. Weak light illuminated a space filled with dust and decay, religious icons covered in cobwebs, a small altar long abandoned. Evelyn turned to face him and stopped cold. Adrian looked terrible. His face was drawn, exhausted, eyes hollow with the kind of fatigue that came from weeks of terror. This wasn't the cold Duke who'd humiliated her at dinner. This was a man barely holding himself together. "How long have you been tracking me?" she asked. 3 days, since I left the last message." Adrian set the candle on the altar and leaned against the wall. "I needed to make sure you weren't compromised, that you were actually gathering intelligence instead of working for Cedric. You thought I might be a spy." "Everyone's a spy in Blackthorn until proven otherwise." Adrian's voice carried bitter experience. "You learn that or you die. And now? Now I know you're either the bravest or stupidest person I've ever met. Possibly both." Evelyn moved closer, studying his face in the candlelight. "You heard what they said about the child. They're actively hunting for them. I know. Then we need to do nothing. Adrian cut her off, his voice sharp. That child is safe, hidden where neither Cedric nor Whitmore will ever find them, and they're going to stay hidden until they're old enough to survive what comes next. Which is what? Evelyn demanded. You spending the rest of your life playing defense while murderers run free? If that's what survival requires, yes. That's not survival. That's cowardice. The word hit like a thrown blade. Adrian's expression went cold, dangerous, and for a moment Evelyn thought she'd gone too far. Then his control shattered, and everything came pouring out. You want to know about cowardice? Adrian's voice was raw, stripped of armor. I watched the woman I loved get murdered because I wasn't fast enough to stop it. I held her broken body at the bottom of those stairs and listened to her die while Cedric stood at the top, smiling. I've spent 9 years knowing exactly who killed her and being too powerless to do anything about it. So don't you dare call me a coward. The confession echoed in the small space. Evelyn stared at him, seeing past the cold exterior to the wounded thing underneath. This man hadn't been haunted by guilt. He'd been destroyed by it, hollowed out, turned into something that could barely remember what it meant to be human. I'm sorry, she said quietly. Sorry doesn't change anything. Adrian turned away, his shoulders rigid. Nothing changes anything. That's the lesson I've learned. The powerful stay powerful. The dead stay dead. And justice is just a word people use to feel better about their own helplessness. That's not true. Isn't it? Adrian spun back to face her. Name one time the system worked. One time the truth actually mattered more than money and influence. You can't, because it doesn't exist. Then we make it exist. Adrian laughed, the sound harsh and ugly. With what? A letter? Testimony from servants who will recant the moment they're threatened? The word of a disgraced governess and a duke everyone thinks is insane? With the child. The suggestion stopped Adrian cold. Evelyn saw the exact moment understanding dawned across his face. You're talking about bringing them here, he said slowly, putting them directly in danger. I'm talking about using the one piece of evidence that can't be dismissed. DNA doesn't lie. If we can prove parentage, they'll kill the child before any test can be performed. Adrian's voice was flat. That's not a strategy. That's suicide. Then what is your strategy? Keep them hidden forever? Let them grow up not knowing who they are or what they're owed? Let their mother's murderers die peacefully in their beds? The questions hit their marks. Adrian's jaw tightened, his hands curling into fists. You don't understand what you're asking, he said quietly. I understand perfectly. You're afraid. Not of losing, of trying, because trying means admitting you might fail, and failure means Rosalie died for nothing. Don't, Adrian warned. But Evelyn was done being careful, done watching this man drown in his own guilt while murderers went unpunished. She loved you. She trusted you to protect your child. And you've spent 9 years hiding instead of fighting. When does that change? When does the man she loved show up instead of this ghost? Adrian moved before she could react, closing the distance between them in 2 strides, his hand wrapping around her throat. Not squeezing, just resting there. A promise. A threat. You have no idea what I've done to keep that child safe, he said, his voice barely controlled. The people I've paid. The strings I've pulled. The pieces of myself I've sacrificed to make sure they survive. Then let them inherit what's theirs. Evelyn didn't pull away from his grip. Let their mother's death mean something. They stared at each other in the candlelight, both breathing hard, the space between them charged with violence and something else. Something that felt dangerous and inevitable and completely insane given the circumstances. Adrian's hand dropped from her throat. If we do this, if I bring them here, there's no going back, he said. Cedric will know. Whitmore will know. Every enemy we have will converge on Blackthorn, and they won't stop until everyone involved is dead. I know. You'll die. Most likely, I'll die. The child might die. Also, the truth can come out. Better than living like this. Adrian studied her face for a long moment. Then he nodded, something shifting behind his eyes. Decision made. Game begun. The child is in Scotland, he said, hidden with a family who believes they're caring for a distant relative. I can have them here in 4 days. And then we arrange the masquerade ball, invite everyone who matters, and we expose the whole rotten conspiracy in front of witnesses who can't be silenced. That's your plan? Public theater? It's the only plan that works. Adrian's voice gained strength, fed by momentum. If we do this privately, we get assassinated. If we make it public, if we force Cedric and Whitmore to confess in front of the entire aristocracy, they can't kill us without proving our accusations. They'll deny everything. Not if we have proof. The letter. The child. Testimony from servants who can corroborate Rosalie's final days. Adrian's mind was already racing ahead, calculating angles. It won't be elegant, but it might work. Might. The word hung between them, loaded with all the ways this could fail, but might was better than nothing. Might was better than slow suffocation. 4 days, Evelyn said. That's not much time to prepare. Then we'd better start now. Adrian moved to the door, then paused and looked back. His expression was different now. Still haunted, still carrying 9 years of damage, but underneath it something new. Something that looked dangerously like hope. Thank you, he said quietly. For what? For reminding me that some things are worth dying for. He left before she could respond, disappearing into the dark corridors, and Evelyn stood alone in the abandoned chapel with her heart pounding and her mind spinning through everything that could go wrong. 4 days. 4 days to plan a public confrontation with murderers. 4 days to gather evidence, coordinate testimony, arrange security for a child whose existence was a death sentence. 4 days to do what Adrian had failed to accomplish in 9 years. She should be terrified, and she was. But underneath the terror lived something else. Purpose. The bone-deep certainty that this was why she'd stayed, why she'd hidden in the walls, why she'd refused to run when given the chance. Rosalie Whitmore had died trying to protect her child and expose corruption. Now her ghost had allies, and those allies were done hiding. What? The next 72 hours passed in a blur of controlled chaos. Adrian worked his connections, sending coded messages to Scotland, arranging travel for the child under circumstances that wouldn't attract attention. Evelyn moved through the walls, gathering servants who might testify, promising protection, building a network of witnesses who'd been too afraid to speak before. They met twice more in the chapel tower, comparing notes, adjusting plans, both of them running on adrenaline and determination. Neither mentioned the fact that this would probably kill them. That kind of honesty would make action impossible. On the third night, everything changed. Evelyn was in her hiding place in the East Wing, going through documents she'd stolen from Cedric's study, when she heard footsteps approaching. Not servants, too heavy, too deliberate. She froze, barely breathing, pressing herself into the narrow gap between walls. The footsteps stopped directly outside her hiding place. You can come out now, Miss Carrington. A man's voice, not Cedric, not Adrian, someone else. I know you're in there. Evelyn's blood went cold. She didn't move. The owner of the voice sighed. I suppose we'll have to do this the hard way. Something crashed into the wall beside her. Wood splintered, plaster cracked, and suddenly hands were reaching through the gap, grabbing her arms, dragging her out into the corridor. Evelyn screamed, but a hand clamped over her mouth, muffling the sound. She was thrown onto the dusty floor, her head cracking against hardwood. Stars exploded across her vision. When she could focus again, 2 men stood over her, large, professional, the kind of men who hurt people for money. Behind them, Lord Whitmore stepped out of the shadows. The governess. Everyone believes left in disgrace, he said, his voice pleasant and conversational. Except you didn't leave, did you? You've been living in the walls like a rat, gathering evidence, playing spy. Evelyn's mind raced through escape routes. There were none. The corridor was narrow, the men blocking both exits. She was trapped. Where is it? Whitmore crouched down, his face level with hers. The letter. Rosalie's final accusation. I know you have it. I don't know what you're talking about. Whitmore smiled. It wasn't a kind expression. Miss Carrington, I've spent 9 years cleaning up messes. I'm very good at it. I'm also very good at identifying when someone is lying to me. So let's skip the denials and move directly to the part where you tell me what I want to know. He nodded to one of his men. The man stepped forward and grabbed Evelyn's hand, bending her fingers back at an angle that sent white-hot pain shooting up her arm. She gasped, biting down on her tongue to keep from screaming. "The letter," Whitmore repeated calmly. "Where is it?" Evelyn tasted copper, blood from where she'd bitten herself. The pain in her hand was excruciating, building with each second the man maintained pressure. "I don't—" The finger bent further. Something popped. Evelyn couldn't stop the scream this time. "You're going to tell me eventually," Whitmore said. "We both know that. The only question is how much damage you sustain first. So please, make this easy." Through the agony, Evelyn's mind worked frantically. If she told him about the letter, Adrian lost his only leverage. If she didn't, they'd break her piece by piece until she talked or died. Either way, she was finished. But she could buy time. Could send them in the wrong direction long enough for Adrian to realize something was wrong. "It's hidden," she gasped. "In the library, behind the third shelf on the east wall." Whitmore studied her face, looking for the lie. Evelyn kept her expression as neutral as possible, despite the pain screaming through her hand. "Show us," Whitmore said. The men hauled her to her feet. Her hand hung at a wrong angle, the finger clearly broken, agony radiating up her arm. They marched her through the corridor, down the servant stairs, into the public sections of Blackthorn. If they encountered anyone, it would all be over, but the palace was mostly asleep, the late hour ensuring empty hallways. They reached the library. Evelyn led them to the east wall, to the third shelf, and watched as one of the men pulled books aside looking for a hidden compartment that didn't exist. "Nothing," the man reported after several minutes of searching. Whitmore's expression didn't change, but something cold entered his eyes. He turned to Evelyn. "You lied." Before she could respond, he struck her across the face. The blow sent her sprawling, her broken hand hitting the floor first. The pain was so intense, she nearly blacked out. "I admire your courage, Miss Carrington." Whitmore's voice came from somewhere above her. "But courage without intelligence is just stupidity, and I have no patience for stupid people." He crouched beside her again. "One more chance. Where's the letter?" Evelyn tasted blood. Her entire body was a map of pain, and she realized with absolute clarity that she wasn't going to survive this conversation. Whitmore wasn't interrogating her for information. He was eliminating a witness, which meant she had nothing left to lose. She spit blood at his feet. "Burn in hell." Whitmore sighed. "As you wish." He stood and nodded to his men. One of them pulled out a knife. "Make it look like an accident," Whitmore said calmly. "A fall. A robbery gone wrong. Something believable." The man with the knife moved forward. Evelyn tried to scramble backward, but her broken hand betrayed her, sent her crashing into a bookshelf. Books tumbled around her. The man kept coming. Then the library door burst open, and Adrian was there. He moved faster than Evelyn had ever seen anyone move, crossing the space in heartbeats, his fist connecting with the knife wielder's jaw with a crack that echoed off the walls. The man went down hard. The second guard rushed Adrian, but the Duke was already turning, using momentum to drive his elbow into the man's throat. The guard made a choking sound and collapsed. It happened so fast that Whitmore barely had time to react. He reached for something inside his coat, a weapon probably, but Adrian was already on him, slamming him against the bookshelf hard enough to knock the air from his lungs. "You made a mistake coming here," Adrian said, his voice deadly calm. "Did I?" Whitmore wheezed, but his eyes were calculating. "Or did you? Because the moment you assault me, you prove everything I've said about you, that you're violent, unstable, dangerous." Adrian's hand tightened on Whitmore's throat. "Say another word and I'll kill you right here." "You won't, because you're not actually a killer." Whitmore smiled despite the pressure on his windpipe. "That's always been your weakness, Adrian. You have lines you won't cross." "I don't." The words hung in the air. Adrian's expression shifted, and Evelyn saw the exact moment he understood the trap. If he killed Whitmore now, he became the monster everyone feared. If he let him go, Whitmore would spin this into proof of Adrian's instability. Either way, Whitmore won. Adrian must have reached the same conclusion because he released Whitmore and stepped back. The older man gasped for air, rubbing his throat, his smile returning. "Smart choice," Whitmore said. "Now here's what's going to happen. You're going to retrieve that letter and give it to me. You're going to stop asking questions about my daughter's death, and you're going to have this governess removed from the premises permanently. In exchange, I'll forget this unpleasantness happened. And if I refuse, Then I go to the authorities and report that you've been harboring a criminal, assaulted a peer of the realm, and are clearly suffering from delusions that make you a danger to yourself and others. Whitmore straightened his coat. I have witnesses. I have evidence. I have connections. What do you have, Adrian? A letter written by a dead woman and the word of servants who will recant the moment I pay them? The truth was brutal. Whitmore had positioned himself perfectly. Every move Adrian made could be twisted into evidence of instability. Every witness could be bought or intimidated, and the system, the entire rotten system, would side with money and influence over justice. Adrian's expression was stone, but Evelyn saw the defeat bleeding through. They'd lost. Not the war, maybe, but this battle, decisively. I need time, Adrian said finally. You have until dawn. Whitmore moved toward the door, then paused. And Adrian? If anything happens to me, if I have an unfortunate accident or sudden illness, there are documents that will be opened. Documents detailing every shred of evidence connecting you to Rosalie's death. Real evidence. Not speculation. By the time those documents finish circulating, you'll hang. He left with his injured men, limping but triumphant. The door closed behind them with awful finality. Adrian stood frozen for a long moment, his breathing harsh, his hands shaking with suppressed rage. Then he moved to Evelyn, helping her up with gentle hands that contrasted sharply with the violence she'd just witnessed. Your hand, he said quietly. It's broken. I'll get the physician. No. Evelyn's voice was steadier than she felt. No one can know I'm still here. Then I'll set it myself. Adrian's face was grim. I've done it before. He led her to a chair and worked with surprising gentleness, straightening the broken finger, binding it with strips torn from his own shirt. The pain was excruciating, but Evelyn bit down on her sleeve and endured. Pain was temporary. Defeat was permanent. When he finished, Adrian sat back and the full weight of their situation settled over them both. He has us, Evelyn said. Doesn't he? Yes. The admission was worse than shouting. Adrian had spent 9 years fighting, and in the end, Whitmore had outmaneuvered them with casual efficiency. They had no moves left. No options, no path forward that didn't end in death or imprisonment. The child, Evelyn said suddenly, we can still... The child stays hidden. Adrian's voice was final. I won't sacrifice them to save myself. So that's it? We give up? We survive to fight another day. There won't be another day. Evelyn felt tears burning her eyes. Whitmore will make sure of it. He'll eliminate every loose end, starting with me. I'll protect you. You can't. Evelyn met his eyes. We both know you can't. The moment dawn comes, I'm a liability you can't afford. The truth of it hung between them. Adrian's face was anguished, torn between survival instinct and whatever remained of his humanity. And Evelyn understood with crystalline clarity that she'd become exactly what he'd warned her about. A liability. A complication. A problem that needed to be eliminated to ensure his survival. She wondered if he'd do it himself or let Whitmore handle it. Then Adrian did something completely unexpected. He pulled out a sealed envelope from inside his coat and pressed it into her hands. What is this? Money. Enough to disappear. There's also a name, someone who can help you establish a new identity, and a location where you'll be safe. Evelyn stared at the envelope. You're letting me go. I'm giving you a chance. Take it. Disappear. Live. And you? I'll handle Whitmore my way. The words carried weight. Evelyn looked up sharply and saw something dangerous in Adrian's expression. Something that looked like a man who'd finally crossed his own lines. What are you going to do? Something I should have done 9 years ago. Adrian's voice was quiet but certain. I'm going to stop playing defense. I'm going to burn this entire rotten system down even if I burn with it. That's suicide. Probably, but at least it's active suicide. At least I'll go down swinging instead of drowning slowly. He stood and moved to the door. Evelyn wanted to argue, to talk him down, to find some other solution. But there wasn't one. They'd been outplayed, and now all that remained was choosing how to lose. Quietly or spectacularly. With dignity or with fire. Adrian paused at the door and looked back one last time. For what it's worth, he said, you made me remember what it felt like to hope. That's more than anyone else has managed in 9 years. Then he was gone, and Evelyn sat alone in the library, clutching an envelope full of blood money and escape routes. Her hand throbbed. Her face ached where Whitmore had struck her. And somewhere deep in her chest, fury was building. The kind of fury that came from watching good people get crushed by systems designed to protect the guilty. She looked at the envelope in her hands. Freedom, safety, survival. Then she tore it in half. Because Evelyn Carrington had spent her whole life running from powerful men and watching them win. And she was done. Done hiding, done surviving, done accepting that justice was just a pretty lie people told themselves. If Adrian was going to burn, she'd light the match with him. And if they died, at least they'd die fighting instead of drowning. She stood, cradling her broken hand, and walked out of the library. Dawn was hours away. That gave her time. Time to do one final, catastrophically stupid thing. Time to go find Margaret and tell a 7-year-old girl exactly who had murdered her cousin Rosalie. Because children remembered. And children grew up. And someday that girl would be old enough to demand justice on her own terms. The war wasn't over. It had just entered its final, bloodiest phase. And everyone was about to learn that ghosts didn't rest until they dragged the guilty down to hell with them. The masquerade ball was scheduled for tomorrow night. And Adrian Ravenshire had 48 hours to orchestrate the destruction of everyone who'd ever hurt him, including himself if necessary. Because men with nothing left to lose became the most dangerous creatures alive, not despite their desperation, but because of it. When survival stops mattering, action becomes pure, uncomplicated, lethal. He stood in his study as dawn broke over Blackthorn, watching light creep across frozen gardens, and felt something fundamental shift inside his chest. For 9 years he'd been playing defense, protecting what remained, keeping the child hidden and the letter secret and himself alive through sheer stubborn refusal to let the bastards win. But defense was just slow death. It kept you breathing without ever letting you live. Whitmore had miscalculated. He'd assumed Adrian would choose survival over justice the way he always had. He'd assumed wrong. A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. Adrian turned to find Thomas standing in the doorway, the young footman who'd been on Cedric's payroll for 3 years. One of the spies. One of the traitors feeding information to murderers. Your Grace, the carriage from Scotland arrived an hour ago. The passenger is in the East Wing, as you requested. Adrian's heart hammered once hard. The child. Here. In Blackthorn. Every instinct screamed that this was suicide, that bringing the heir into the viper's nest guaranteed their death. But instinct was just fear wearing logic's clothing, and Adrian was done listening to fear. Thank you, Thomas. That will be all. The footman hesitated. Your Grace, if I may, Lord Cedric has been asking about unusual arrivals. I'm sure he has. Adrian's voice was flat. You can report to him that a distant cousin has arrived for the masquerade. Nothing more. Thomas shifted uncomfortably. He wasn't stupid. He'd seen enough over the years to know something was happening, something that would change Blackthorn forever. The question was whether he'd choose his paymaster or his conscience when the moment came. Actually, Thomas, Adrian said quietly, there's something else you can do for me. Your Grace, tonight you're going to decide whose side you're on, mine or the man who's been paying you to spy on me. The footman went pale. Your Grace, Don't lie. Adrian moved closer, using height and presence as weapons. I've known for 2 years. I know exactly how much Cedric pays you and what information you provide. So let's skip the denial and move to the choice. Continue working for my brother and accept the consequences when this all ends. Or work for me and survive what's coming. Thomas swallowed hard. What's coming? War. Adrian's voice was cold, certain. Tomorrow night, every person in this house will have to choose the truth or the lie, justice or complicity, and the people who choose wrong will burn. He let that sink in. Watch Thomas process the implications. The footman was young, maybe 25, probably recruited by Cedric with promises of extra money and protection. But protection from murderers was just another word for being an accomplice. I need time to think, Thomas said finally. You have until sunset. After that, I assume you're with Cedric and plan accordingly. Thomas left quickly, his footsteps echoing down the hallway. Adrian listened until silence returned, then moved toward the East Wing where a 9-year-old child who should have inherited an empire was waiting to meet the father they'd never known. The walk through Blackthorn felt different today. Longer, heavier. Every tapestry, every portrait, every architectural detail spoke of centuries of Ravenshire power built on secrets and silence. Tomorrow night, that power would either be reborn through truth or die in flames. Adrian found he didn't particularly care which. He reached the East Wing quarters and found Evelyn standing guard outside the door, her broken hand bound, her face bruised but her eyes fierce. She shouldn't be here. He'd given her escape money and instructions to disappear. Instead, she'd torn up his offering and positioned herself as the final barrier between the child and danger. "You're supposed to be gone," Adrian said. "I'm supposed to be a lot of things." Evelyn met his gaze without flinching. "Turns out I'm bad at following instructions." Despite everything, Adrian felt something almost like a smile try to surface. "Almost." "How are they?" he asked, nodding toward the door. Terrified. Confused. They don't understand why they were pulled from the only home they've known and brought here. Adrian's chest tightened. This was cruelty masquerading as justice, forcing a child into danger to settle adult debts. But there was no other way. The inheritance laws were clear. DNA evidence combined with documented proof of parentage would override any conspiracy. The child was the key that unlocked everything, assuming they survived long enough to testify. "I need to speak with them," Adrian said. Evelyn stepped aside. Her expression carried warning and sympathy in equal measure. "They have Rosalie's eyes." The observation hit harder than expected. Adrian steeled himself and entered the room. The child sat on the edge of the bed, small and uncertain, wearing traveling clothes that were too large, dark hair, pale skin, and yes, gray-blue eyes that were absolutely Rosalie's. Adrian felt 9 years of grief slam into him with physical force. "You must be Adrian," the child said, voice steady despite obvious fear. "The letters you sent always started with my father's name but never explained who he was." Adrian crossed the room slowly, keeping his movements non-threatening. He crouched down to eye level, studying the face that was half Rosalie, half him, entirely its own person. "Your father was me," he said quietly. "Your mother was Rosalie Whitmore. And you are James Ravenshire, legitimate heir to Blackthorn and everything it represents." The child, James, stared at him. "I was told my parents died in an accident, that I was being protected. You were." Adrian forced himself to hold eye contact. But protection can't last forever. Eventually, you have to know the truth. Your mother was murdered, and tomorrow night we're going to prove it. James's face went through several emotions too quickly to track. Shock, anger, fear. Then something unexpected, determination. "Who killed her?" "Your grandfather, my brother, possibly others." Adrian didn't soften it. "This child deserved honesty. They arranged her death to prevent you from inheriting. They've spent 9 years trying to find you so they could finish what they started, and now you've brought me here." James's voice was accusing. "Where they can reach me." "Yes." "Why?" "Because hiding only works until someone finds you." And they were getting close. Adrian's throat was tight. "Because justice requires witnesses, and you're the only witness who can't be silenced or bought. Because your mother died protecting you, and I've failed her for 9 years, but I won't fail her tomorrow night." The words hung between them. James studied Adrian's face with those two knowing eyes, seeing past the cold exterior to the broken thing underneath. "You loved her," James said. "It wasn't a question. More than anything. And you've been protecting me since I was born." "Trying to." Adrian's voice cracked slightly, not always successfully. James stood and did something completely unexpected, stepped forward and wrapped small arms around Adrian's waist. The embrace was brief, awkward, but devastatingly sincere. "Thank you for not giving up on me," James whispered. Adrian's throat closed completely. He returned the embrace with gentle hands, feeling the weight of responsibility and grief and something that might have been love settle across his shoulders. This was Rosalie's child. His child. The heir who should have grown up knowing both parents instead of hiding in exile. Tomorrow would either make that right or kill them all trying. But the next 30 hours passed in controlled chaos. Adrian sent invitations to every person who mattered. Lords, ladies, politicians, judges, anyone with influence or the ability to serve as witness. The masquerade theme provided perfect cover. Everyone would attend, masked, anonymous, free to watch scandals unfold without immediate judgment. Cedric accepted his invitation immediately, probably assuming this was Adrian's final surrender. Whitmore accepted next, his response carrying undertones of smug victory. They thought they'd won. They thought Adrian was playing by their rules. They were about to learn that men with nothing to lose stopped following rules entirely. Evelyn worked through the night gathering servants who'd testify, promising protection, building a network of voices that couldn't all be silenced at once. Thomas finally made his choice an hour before deadline, appearing in Adrian's study with ledgers documenting every bribe Cedric had paid, every order he'd given, every piece of evidence connecting him to Rosalie's murder. "I want immunity," Thomas said, his hand shaking as he placed the ledgers on Adrian's desk. "I want protection. I want out. You'll have all three if your testimony holds." Adrian didn't touch the ledgers yet. "If it doesn't, you hang with the rest of them. Understood?" Other servants followed. Sarah from the kitchen, who'd seen Cedric and Whitmore arguing the night before Rosalie died. Mrs. Crawford, who'd been ordered to clean blood from the East Tower stairs, despite the official story claiming Rosalie had fallen on the west side. A stable hand who'd prepared a carriage for Whitmore's late-night arrival hours before the supposed accident. Piece by piece, the conspiracy's armor developed cracks. None of it would hold up in court alone. Servant testimony was too easily dismissed, ledgers could be forged, timelines could be disputed. But combined with James's DNA and Rosalie's letter, it became something more. A tapestry of evidence that pointed to one undeniable truth. Rosalie Whitmore had been murdered, and powerful men had conspired to bury it. As night fell and guests began arriving, Adrian dressed in his evening clothes with mechanical precision. Black coat, black mask. Everything dark except the white cravat that felt like a noose. He checked his reflection and barely recognized the man staring back. Hollowed out, haunted. But underneath the damage, something new burned, purpose. A knock on his door. Evelyn entered without waiting for permission, dressed in a borrowed gown that was too large but serviceable. Her broken hand was concealed beneath long gloves. Her face was pale but determined. "James is secured," she said, "hidden in the servants' passage behind the ballroom. When you give the signal, I'll bring them out." "And if this goes wrong," Adrian asked, "if Cedric or Whitmore moves before we're ready, then I get James out through the north exit and run." Evelyn's voice was steady. "We already discussed this." They had. Extensively. Every contingency, every backup plan, every worst-case scenario. It still felt inadequate, like trying to plug a dam with prayers and desperation. Adrian moved to his desk and pulled out Rosalie's letter, the paper worn from 9 years of handling. He'd memorized every word but needed to see the handwriting one more time. Her final testament, her accusation, her legacy. "She trusted me," he said quietly, "and I let her die. You were one man against a conspiracy." Evelyn crossed the room to stand beside him. "You couldn't have stopped it. I could have tried harder. You'd be dead too." "Maybe that would have been better." Evelyn grabbed his arm, forcing him to look at her. "Listen to me. What happened to Rosalie was not your fault. You've spent 9 years drowning in guilt for a crime you didn't commit. Tonight you get to make them pay. So stop punishing yourself and start focusing on punishing them." The words hit like a slap. Adrian stared at this woman who'd voluntarily walked into hell to help a man she barely knew, who'd sacrificed her safety and her future for a ghost justice, and felt something shift in his chest. Gratitude, maybe. Or recognition, or something more dangerous that he didn't have time to examine. "Why are you doing this?" he asked. "Really? You could be anywhere right now, safe, free." "Because I spent my whole life watching powerful men get away with everything," Evelyn said. "Watching them lie and cheat and murder and face zero consequences. And I got tired of it, so when you offered me a chance to actually make one of them pay, I took it, even if it kills you? Especially if it kills me." Evelyn's smile was sharp. "At least I'll die fighting instead of drowning." They stood together in the study while music and laughter drifted up from the ballroom below. 300 guests gathering to witness either justice or massacre. Adrian wasn't sure which. Wasn't sure it mattered. What mattered was trying, fighting, refusing to let the bastards win through silence and complicity. "It's time," Evelyn said. Adrian tucked Rosalie's letter inside his coat, felt the paper rest against his heart where it belonged, and walked toward the door. Evelyn followed. They descended the grand staircase together, two ghosts returning to the land of the living for one final confrontation. The ballroom was already full, masked figures swirling through carefully choreographed dances, champagne flowing, conversations buzzing with gossip and speculation. Adrian scanned the crowd and found Cedric almost immediately. His brother stood near the center of the room, golden mask doing nothing to hide his identity, surrounded by admirers. Whitmore lingered near the far wall, his expression carefully neutral, but his eyes tracking Adrian's every move. They knew something was happening, could feel the tension crackling through the air like electricity before a storm. But they didn't know what, didn't know how. That uncertainty was Adrian's only advantage. He moved through the crowd accepting pleasantries, making small talk, playing the role of host while his mind calculated timing and angles. The musicians finished one piece and began another. Couples paired off for the waltz. Everything proceeded according to normal ballroom tradition. Then Adrian stepped onto the raised platform where the musician sat and raised his hand for silence. The music stopped. Conversations died. 300 masked faces turned toward him with curiosity and barely concealed hunger for scandal. Aristocrats live for moments like this: public drama, social destruction, the fall of powerful families. Adrian was about to give them a show they'd never forget. "Thank you all for attending tonight," he began. His voice carried across the ballroom, steady and cold. "I know many of you came expecting another evening of meaningless pageantry, dancing and drinking and pretending we're all civilized people instead of dressed-up predators. But tonight is different." He paused, letting his words settle. Across the room, Cedric's expression shifted. Whitmore moved toward the nearest exit. Adrian raised his hand and 4 servants blocked the doors. Thomas and 3 others, their faces grim but determined. "No one leaves," Adrian said. "Not until you've heard what I have to say." The ballroom erupted in murmurs. Several guests protested. Lord Ashford demanded an explanation. Adrian waited for the noise to die down naturally, using silence as a weapon. 9 years ago, Lady Rosalie Whitmore died in what was ruled an accident, he continued. She fell down the stairs of this very palace. Tragic, inexplicable, but ultimately explainable through bad luck and unfortunate circumstance. He pulled out Rosalie's letter, holding it up so everyone could see. Except it wasn't an accident. It was murder. And the men responsible are in this room right now. The ballroom went dead silent. Adrian saw Cedric's face go pale behind his mask. Whitmore's hand moved to his coat, reaching for a weapon he'd been smart enough to bring. "This letter was written by Lady Rosalie the night before she died," Adrian said. "In it, she details discovering a conspiracy to defraud the Ravenshire inheritance. She names the people involved. And she explains why she knew they would kill her to keep the secret." He turned to face his brother directly. "Cedric Ravenshire pushed her down those stairs. Lord Edward Whitmore helped arrange it. And they've spent 9 years covering their tracks, while I spent 9 years trying to survive long enough to expose them." The accusations landed like bombs. The ballroom erupted in chaos. Cedric moved toward the platform, his face twisted with fury. "You're insane," he shouted. "Everyone knows you're insane. This is the delusion of a grief-stricken—" "I have proof." Adrian's voice cut through the noise. "I have testimony from servants who witnessed the conspiracy. I have financial records showing bribes and payoffs. And I have the one piece of evidence that can't be disputed." He gestured toward the servants' passage. Evelyn appeared, leading James by the hand. The child walked into the ballroom with their head high, gray-blue eyes scanning the crowd with Rosalie's courage shining through. "This is James Ravenshire," Adrian said, "legitimate heir. Born 9 months after Rosalie's death from a pregnancy she'd hidden to protect the child from exactly this kind of danger. DNA will prove parentage. Birth records will confirm timing. And testimony will establish that Cedric and Whitmore both knew about the pregnancy and moved to eliminate the threat it represented." James stood beside Adrian, small and vulnerable, but radiantly present. The resemblance to Rosalie was unmistakable. Several guests gasped. Others pulled out lorgnettes to study the child's face more closely. Whitmore finally found his voice. "This is absurd. That child could be anyone. You've manufactured this entire—" "I'm Rosalie's father," Whitmore said coldly. "And I say this is a fraud. Some bastard you've hired to play a role in your sick fantasy." "Then explain the letter," Adrian said. He began reading aloud, his voice steady despite the emotions threatening to choke him. Rosalie's words filled the ballroom, her fear, her discoveries, her certainty that she would die, her desperate plea to protect their child. By the time Adrian finished, tears tracked down several guests' faces. The ballroom had gone from chaos to horrified silence. "You murdered your own daughter," Adrian said, staring directly at Whitmore. "You conspired with my brother to kill a pregnant woman because exposing your fraud was more important than her life. And you've spent 9 years lying about it, while I've spent 9 years trying to survive long enough to make you pay." Whitmore's face was stone. "The letter proves nothing. It's the ramblings of a disturbed woman, and this child changes nothing. I'll have them arrested for fraud before—" "Actually," a new voice interrupted, "you won't." Judge Blackwood stepped forward from the crowd, removing his mask. One of the most powerful jurists in England, a man whose word carried the weight of law itself. "I've heard enough to warrant immediate investigation," Blackwood said. "Lord Cedric, Lord Whitmore, you are both under arrest pending formal inquiry into these allegations." The ballroom exploded. Cedric lunged toward the platform, but Thomas and the other servants intercepted him. Whitmore drew a pistol from his coat and aimed directly at James. Everything happened in slow motion. Adrian saw the weapon, saw Whitmore's finger tighten on the trigger, saw James frozen with fear. He moved without thinking, throwing himself between the child and the gun. The shot rang out, deafeningly loud in the enclosed space. Pain exploded through Adrian's shoulder, spinning him sideways. He crashed into James, using his body as a shield, feeling blood spread hot and fast across his chest. Evelyn screamed. The crowd surged. More servants tackled Whitmore, wrestling the weapon away. Cedric was dragged to the floor by 6 men who'd finally chosen the right side. Adrian lay on the platform with James underneath him, protected by his body, and felt consciousness start to slip. The pain was immense, overwhelming. But underneath it lived something else: satisfaction. He'd done it. The truth was out. The conspiracy exposed, and James was alive. That was enough. That was everything. Evelyn's face appeared above him, her hands pressing against his wound, trying to stop the bleeding. "Stay with me," she demanded. "Don't you dare die now." Adrian tried to smile, succeeded partially. "Did we win?" "Yes, you idiot. We won. Now stay alive long enough to see it." The ballroom spun. Voices shouted for physicians. Someone was crying, probably James. Adrian felt hands lifting him, carrying him somewhere. The ceiling passed overhead in blurred increments. His last conscious thought was of Rosalie. He'd finally kept his promise. Her child was safe. Her murderers were exposed, and the empire built on her death was crumbling. Maybe ghosts could rest after all. Adrian woke to pain and sunlight. His shoulder was bandaged, his arm immobilized, and someone had stripped him to the waist. The room was unfamiliar. Not his bedroom, somewhere smaller, more defensible. A recovery room, maybe. Evelyn sat in a chair beside the bed, her head tilted back against the wall, eyes closed. She looked exhausted, devastated, but alive. Adrian tried to speak, managed a croak that sounded vaguely like her name. Her eyes snapped open. Relief flooded her face. "You're awake." "Thank God." "How long?" 2 days. The bullet shattered your collarbone and nicked an artery. You nearly bled out. Adrian processed this. 2 days. That meant James, he managed, safe, alive, currently being examined by half the physicians in London to confirm parentage. Evelyn moved closer, her good hand finding his. But alive, Adrian. You saved them. And Cedric? Arrested, confessed under interrogation. Turns out when faced with hanging, people become remarkably honest about their accomplices. Whitmore? Also arrested, also confessing. They're turning on each other trying to reduce their sentences. Evelyn's smile was sharp. It's very satisfying to watch. Adrian closed his eyes, letting the relief wash over him. They'd won. Against impossible odds, against entrenched power, against a system designed to protect monsters. They'd actually won. You should rest, Evelyn said softly. In a minute. Adrian forced his eyes open. There's something I need to say. It can wait. No, it can't. Adrian's voice was rough but certain. You saved my life multiple times. You risked everything for a cause that wasn't yours and a man you barely knew. Why? Evelyn was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice carried weight. Because someone had to. Because powerful men only stay powerful when good people do nothing. And because I looked at you and saw someone still fighting even after 9 years of drowning, that kind of persistence deserves support. That's not an answer, isn't it? Evelyn met his eyes. You want me to say something romantic, that I fell in love with the tragic Duke. But the truth is simpler. I saw someone who needed help and I helped, that's all. Except it wasn't all. They both knew it. Whatever had grown between them in the walls of Blackthorn, whatever connection had formed through shared danger and desperate purpose, it was more than simple altruism. But naming it would make it real, and real things could be destroyed. Thank you, Adrian said instead, for everything. Thank you for letting me help. She squeezed his hand once, gentle around the bandages, then released it. Rest now. James wants to visit when you're strong enough. Adrian nodded, exhaustion pulling him back under. As consciousness slipped away, he heard Evelyn move toward the door, heard her pause, heard her speak so softly he almost missed it. For what it's worth, she said, I think Rosalie would be proud of you. Then she was gone, and Adrian was alone with his pain and his victory and the ghost of a woman who'd loved him enough to trust him with their child's life. He'd spent 9 years failing her, but in the end, when it mattered most, he'd succeeded. The war was over. The truth had won. And Blackthorn Palace would never be the same. But in the silence of the recovery room, Adrian understood something crucial. Winning didn't erase the scars. It didn't undo the damage. It didn't bring back the dead or heal the wounded. Victory just meant you survived long enough to face the consequences. And the consequences were coming. Trials, testimonies, the complete dismantling of everything Cedric and Whitmore had built. It would be brutal, public. It would destroy reputations and reshape power structures and force England's aristocracy to confront truths they'd rather ignore. Adrian would have to face it all, stand trial as a witness, watch his brother hang, rebuild Blackthorn from ruins, raise a child who should have had both parents but got only a damaged duke and a future full of complicated truths. It would be the hardest thing he'd ever done. Harder than surviving. Harder than fighting. Because living required hope, and Adrian had spent 9 years forgetting what hope felt like. But somewhere in the walls of Blackthorn, a governess who refused to run was teaching him to remember. And in the East Wing, a child with Rosalie's eyes was learning that sometimes justice required sacrifice, but was worth fighting for anyway. The Empire was crumbling, the ghosts were finally resting, and Adrian Ravenshire was learning how to breathe again. Outside his window, dawn broke over Blackthorn Palace. The light crept across frost-covered gardens where Rosalie had walked 9 years ago, full of life and hope and the certainty that truth mattered. She'd been wrong about so many things, but not that. Truth did matter, even when it cost everything, even when it destroyed you, even when winning felt exactly like losing. The door opened one more time. James appeared, hesitant and hopeful, carrying that peculiar mix of childhood resilience and trauma-born wisdom. "Can I come in?" they asked. Adrian nodded, unable to speak past the emotion clogging his throat. James crossed to the bed and climbed up carefully, mindful of Adrian's injuries. They settled beside him, small and warm and alive. "Evelyn told me you're my father," James said, "that my mother died protecting me, that you've been protecting me ever since." Adrian found his voice. "Yes, thank you." 2 words. But they carried the weight of 9 years of survival against impossible odds, of a love that transcended death and time and every obstacle the world threw in its path. Adrian wrapped his good arm around James and held on, felt the child's heartbeat against his ribs, felt something broken inside him start to heal. This was what Rosalie had fought for. This moment, this connection, this proof that love could survive even murder and conspiracy and the worst humanity had to offer. And in the morning light streaming through windows of Blackthorn Palace, 2 people who should have known each other from birth finally began the long process of becoming family. The war was over. The real work was just beginning. Recovery was a violence all its own. Adrian learned this truth in the weeks following the masquerade, as his body knitted itself back together with agonizing slowness, and his mind struggled to process what survival actually meant. Because survival wasn't the triumphant ending stories promised. It was waking every morning to pain that reminded you the battle had cost something real. It was looking in mirrors and seeing scars that would never fully fade. It was understanding that winning didn't erase the years of losing. It just meant you got to carry the weight forward instead of being crushed beneath it. The trials began 3 weeks after he woke. Adrian testified from a chair in the courtroom because standing for more than 20 minutes made his shoulders scream. He told the truth in careful, measured language while lawyers tried to twist his words into evidence of instability. He watched Cedric sit in the dock with his golden mask finally stripped away, revealing nothing but hollow entitlement and the particular cowardice of men who'd never expected consequences. His brother didn't look at him, not once during 6 days of testimony. Cedric kept his eyes fixed on the middle distance, as if acknowledging Adrian's existence would make the accusations real, as if pretending hard enough could rewrite 9 years of conspiracy and murder into something defensible. It couldn't. The evidence was overwhelming. Thomas's ledgers, Mrs. Crawford's testimony about the blood and the wrong staircase, Sarah's account of arguments overheard, the financial records showing bribes that stretched back a decade, and Rosalie's letter, read aloud in a courtroom that went silent as the dead woman's voice echoed through legal procedure and careful protocol. By the end of the first week, Cedric's defense had collapsed. His lawyers tried to negotiate a plea. The prosecution refused. This was too public, too sensational, too much a test of whether the powerful could be held accountable for anything at all. Whitmore's trial ran parallel, equally damning. Rosalie's father sat in his own dock and watched his reputation burn. Witnesses testified to his involvement in the inheritance fraud, his meetings with Cedric, his knowledge of plans to eliminate his pregnant daughter. The man who should have protected Rosalie had instead conspired in her murder because scandal mattered more than love. Adrian watched from the gallery and felt nothing. No satisfaction, no vindication, just hollow exhaustion that came from finally seeing justice delivered and realizing it didn't resurrect the dead or heal the damage done to everyone who'd loved them. The verdicts came down on a cold morning in late February. Guilty on all counts, both men. Murder. Conspiracy to commit fraud, obstruction of justice. The judge's voice was steady and final as he pronounced sentence. Death by hanging for Cedric. Life imprisonment for Whitmore, his age and cooperation earning him the barest mercy. The courtroom erupted. Reporters scrambled for exits. Adrian sat very still and thought about how 9 years of his life had led to this moment, and how the moment itself felt strangely anticlimactic. He'd imagined Cedric's conviction would feel like victory. Instead, it felt like the ending of something that should never have begun, like closing a book that had been written in blood and grief and realizing the story had destroyed everyone involved. Evelyn found him afterward in the corridor outside the courtroom. She moved through the chaos with quiet efficiency, her broken hand healed now but still stiff, her face carrying the kind of exhaustion that came from watching humans destroy each other through systems designed to protect them. "It's done," she said simply. Adrian nodded. He couldn't find words that matched the moment. Done implied completion, resolution, some kind of closure. But nothing felt closed. The wound was cauterized but still raw. "James is waiting at Blackthorn," Evelyn continued. "They wanted to be here, but I thought, you thought correctly." Adrian's voice was rough. "They don't need to see this. They'll have to see the execution." The observation landed heavy. In 3 weeks, Cedric would hang. Public spectacle. Aristocratic justice. And James would have to witness their uncle's death because the inheritance laws required the heir to be present at executions of family members who'd threatened the line of succession. A barbaric tradition that served no purpose except trauma. "I'll prepare them," Adrian said. "It's my responsibility. Let me help." The offer was simple but carried weight. Evelyn had already sacrificed so much. Her safety, her reputation, her future prospects in a society that would never forgive a governess who'd helped destroy a duke. She'd done it without hesitation and now stood offering more, as if helping was just her nature and she couldn't stop even when the battle was won. Adrian studied her face in the dim corridor light. Bruises faded but not forgotten. Strength earned through choosing to fight when running would have been easier. This woman had walked into hell beside him and emerged on the other side, still offering her hand. "Why do you keep helping me?" he asked quietly. Evelyn's expression was unreadable. Because someone has to. Because you're trying to be better than your damage allows. Because I've spent my life watching good people drown, and I got tired of not throwing ropes. That's still not an answer, isn't it? Evelyn held his gaze. You want me to say something different, that I stayed because of feelings or attraction or some romantic notion. But the truth is messier. I stayed because leaving felt like betrayal. Not of you, of the person I wanted to be. The honesty was brutal and beautiful. Adrian felt something in his chest, not the sharp pain of his injury, but something deeper, older, the ache of recognizing kindred damage in another person. They'd both spent years becoming people they didn't recognize in service of survival. And somewhere in the violence of the past weeks, they'd started remembering who they'd wanted to be before the world taught them to be afraid. Come back to Blackthorn, Adrian said, not as governess, as family. Evelyn's eyes widened slightly. Adrian, I'm not asking you to marry me, not asking for romance or obligation. Adrian's words came carefully, each one chosen with precision. I'm asking if you want to be part of rebuilding something better than what existed before. Blackthorn needs to become more than a monument to secrets and silence. It needs to be a place where people can heal. And I can't do that alone. You have James. James is 9 years old and traumatized and dealing with more than any child should. Adrian's voice softened. They need adults who've survived their own damage and learned to carry it without drowning. You're one of the few people I know who qualifies. Evelyn was quiet for a long moment. Around them, the courthouse continued its chaos. Lawyers arguing, reporters shouting questions, the machinery of justice grinding forward with indifferent momentum. All right, she said finally, I'll come back. But as an equal. Not a servant, not a dependent. Agreed. And if I decide to leave later, you don't stop me. I wouldn't dream of it. Evelyn smiled, something genuine breaking through the exhaustion. Then let's go home. Home. The word felt foreign in Adrian's mouth. Blackthorn had never been home. It had been a prison, a battlefield, a mausoleum. But maybe it could become something different. Maybe buildings could heal the same way people did. Slowly, painfully. With enough time and effort and refusal to let the damage define the future. They left the courthouse together and returned to Blackthorn Palace as twilight settled over frozen gardens. The building looked different now, less oppressive. The shadows weren't hiding enemies anymore, just architectural features that needed better lighting. James waited in the main hall, surrounded by servants who'd chosen truth over complicity. Thomas stood nearby, his young face marked by the weight of testimony and the knowledge that his cooperation had helped hang a duke. Mrs. Crawford hovered with maternal concern. Sarah brought tea nobody would drink. The child ran to Adrian the moment he entered, wrapping small arms around his waist with desperate relief. Adrian returned the embrace carefully, mindful of his healing shoulder, and felt something fundamental settle in his chest. This was what he'd fought for. Not vengeance, not justice in the abstract. This specific child's right to exist safely in a world that had tried to eliminate them. They found him guilty, James said against Adrian's chest. Your brother, my grandfather, all of them. Yes. Good. The word was fierce, carrying rage that no 9-year-old should have to hold. They deserve to die for what they did to my mother. Adrian knelt slowly, bringing himself to eye level despite the protest from his shoulder. They do. But deserving and achieving are different things. Your grandfather gets to live. He'll rot in prison, but he'll live. Because sometimes the system decides death is too easy and forces people to survive their consequences instead. That's not fair. No. It's not. Adrian held James's gaze. Almost nothing about this situation is fair. Your mother died. I spent 9 years barely surviving. You grew up without parents. Cedric gets to hang, but Whitmore gets to breathe. None of it balances. None of it makes sense. That's what injustice looks like. Messy and incomplete and never quite enough. Then what was the point? James's voice broke. If it doesn't make things right, what was the point of any of it? Adrian pulled the child closer. The point was that they don't get to keep winning. The point was that truth matters even when justice is imperfect. The point was that you get to inherit what's yours and grow up knowing your mother died fighting for something real. He felt James shudder against him, the child's grief finally breaking through the shock and anger that had sustained them through weeks of testimony. Adrian held on and let them cry, understanding that tears were just another form of healing, and this child had earned the right to everyone. Evelyn watched from across the hall with something like tenderness softening her features. Around them, servants who'd testified began to drift away, giving the moment privacy. The palace settled into evening quiet, the kind of silence that came after storms when survival stopped being a question and became a strange new reality. The weeks before the execution passed in careful reconstruction. Adrian worked with solicitors to formalize James's inheritance, to untangle the fraud Cedric had perpetrated, to restore properties and assets that should have been held in trust. The paperwork was endless and mind-numbing, but necessary. Justice required documentation. Legitimacy required proof. James began proper education with tutors who understood trauma and loss. Evelyn oversaw the curriculum, ensuring it balanced academic rigor with emotional support. The child was brilliant, too brilliant for their own good sometimes, and needed structure to channel intelligence that would otherwise spiral into obsession. Blackthorn itself underwent transformation. Adrian ordered the East Tower stairs torn out and replaced, unable to stomach the idea of anyone walking where Rosalie had died. He converted Cedric's quarters into a library, erasing his brother's presence through books and knowledge. The servants' quarters were expanded and improved, wages increased, working conditions made humane. It wasn't charity. It was recognition that systems built on exploitation eventually consumed everyone, including the people at the top. If Blackthorn was going to survive, it needed to become something other than a machine that ground people into silence and fear. On the night before the execution, Adrian couldn't sleep. He stood at his study window watching stars emerge through breaking clouds and thought about what morning would bring. His brother's death, public and brutal and final. The end of the Ravenshire conspiracy written in rope and gravity. A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. Evelyn entered without waiting for permission, carrying 2 glasses of whiskey that she set on the desk. "Thought you might need company," she said. Adrian accepted the glass gratefully. They drank in silence for several minutes, both staring out at the winter landscape, both avoiding the obvious conversation. Finally, Evelyn spoke. "Are you going to be all right, watching your brother hang?" Adrian considered lying, decided against it. "No, I don't think I will be." The honesty hung between them. Evelyn moved closer, standing beside him at the window, their shoulders nearly touching. "He was a monster," she said quietly. "He murdered your fiancé. He tried to kill you and James. He deserves what's coming." "I know. Then why does it feel wrong?" "Because he's still my brother." Adrian's voice was raw. "Because we were children together before he became what he became. Because some part of me remembers when he wasn't a monster, and that part is mourning the person he could have been, instead of the one he chose to be." Evelyn absorbed this. When she spoke again, her voice carried the weight of hard-earned wisdom. Loving someone and hating what they became aren't contradictions. They're just the reality of being human. You can mourn the brother you lost years ago while accepting that the man who replaced him earned his fate. Can I? You'll have to, otherwise the grief will eat you alive. She was right, and they both knew it. Adrian turned away from the window to face her properly. Evelyn looked different in candlelight, less severe, more vulnerable, the exhaustion and damage visible in ways harsh daylight concealed. "What happens after tomorrow?" he asked. "After it's done and James is formally recognized and Blackthorn is officially ours?" "We live," Evelyn said simply. "We figure out what that means day by day. We probably make mistakes. We definitely carry damage we'll never fully heal. But we live. Is that enough? It has to be." Evelyn's smile was sad and knowing. Anything else is just slow death with different scenery. Adrian studied her face and made a decision. "When this is over, when the inheritance is settled and James is stable and Blackthorn stops feeling like a battlefield, will you stay?" "I already said I would. Not as family, as something more." The air between them shifted. Evelyn went very still, her expression carefully neutral. "Adrian," she said slowly, "you've been through trauma. You're grieving. You're probably conflating gratitude with—" "I'm not conflating anything." Adrian's voice was steady, certain. "I know exactly what I feel, and I know it's terrible timing and probably a disaster waiting to happen. But I also know that you're the only person who's seen me at my absolute worst and didn't run. And I think that's worth exploring when we're both less damaged. When will that be? Evelyn's tone was dry, but her eyes were bright. We're always going to be damaged. That's the price of surviving what we survived. Then we explore it while damaged. Adrian reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away. She didn't. His hand found hers, the touch careful and deliberate. No expectations. No pressure. Just a question asked through contact instead of words. Evelyn's fingers curled around his. Her grip was strong despite the stiffness from her broken hand. When she spoke, her voice carried vulnerability she usually kept hidden. I've never been good at this. At letting people close. At trusting that closeness won't become another weapon. Neither have I. 9 years of evidence to support that. So we're both terrible prospects. Absolutely disastrous. They stood together in the candlelight, holding hands like adolescents testing boundaries, and something that felt dangerously like hope settled between them. Not the naive hope that came before damage. The harder kind. The kind built on surviving the worst and choosing to believe tomorrow might be better despite overwhelming evidence to the contrary. Stay close tomorrow, Adrian said quietly. During the execution, I don't think I can watch alone. I'll be there. Morning arrived cold and gray. Adrian dressed in black, the color of mourning and endings, and prepared to watch his brother die. James accompanied him at the solicitor's insistence, legal requirement, barbaric tradition, trauma enshrined in procedure. Evelyn stood at Adrian's right hand, her presence solid and grounding. The scaffold had been erected in the courtyard of Newgate Prison. Hundreds gathered to watch. Nobility in the front rows, commoners pressing close behind, everyone hungry for the spectacle of powerful people finally facing consequences. The mood was festive in a way that made Adrian's stomach turn. They'd come to watch death like entertainment, to witness justice reduced to performance. Cedric was led out in chains. His golden hair was lank, his face hollow, the charm that had defined him stripped away by weeks in prison. He looked smaller somehow. Less. As if removing the armor of privilege and power had revealed nothing underneath but ordinary cowardice. Their eyes met across the courtyard. Adrian saw his brother's mouth move, forming words he couldn't hear over the crowd noise. It might have been an apology. It might have been a curse. It didn't matter. Nothing Cedric could say would undo Rosalie's murder or repair the 9 years of damage that followed. The executioner positioned Cedric on the trapdoor, adjusted the noose, read the charges one final time. Adrian felt James's small hand grip his, the child's terror palpable even as they forced themselves to watch. This was their family's legacy, violence and consequence, power turned inward until it consumed everything. The executioner pulled the lever, the trapdoor dropped. Cedric fell. It was faster than Adrian expected. One moment his brother was standing, the next he was hanging, neck broken, body swaying slightly in the cold morning wind. No dramatic final words, no cinematic last stand, just a person becoming a corpse while hundreds watched and cheered. Adrian felt nothing, or everything. He couldn't distinguish between the numbness and the overwhelming crush of emotion. Relief and grief and satisfaction and horror all collapsed into a single point of unbearable pressure in his chest. Beside him, James made a small sound. Not quite a sob. Not quite a gasp. The noise of a child watching violence they shouldn't have to witness and understanding on some fundamental level that they'd carry this moment forever. Adrian knelt and wrapped his arms around James, blocking their view of the scaffold, providing what small shelter he could against trauma that was already done. Evelyn's hand rested on his shoulder, her touch steady and grounding. "It's over," Adrian whispered against James's hair. "It's finally over." But endings were just beginnings disguised. They left Newgate with Cedric's body still swaying in the wind and returned to Blackthorn to face the harder work of living in the aftermath. Of waking each morning and choosing forward momentum instead of drowning in the past. Of learning that justice didn't erase damage. It just meant you got to carry the weight without quite so many ghosts. Spring came slowly to Blackthorn. Ice melted from gardens. Flowers pushed through frost-damaged soil. The palace seemed to breathe differently, as if architectural spaces could sense when their purpose had shifted from prison to possibility. James began to heal, though the process was non-linear and messy. Some days they were just a bright 9-year-old excited about lessons and exploration. Other days the trauma surfaced and they became quiet and withdrawn, haunted by memories of violence and loss. Adrian learned to recognize the patterns, to provide space when needed and presence when requested. Evelyn took over management of the estate with brutal efficiency, rooting out the last of Cedric's paid informants and replacing them with people who understood that employment shouldn't require complicity in abuse. She transformed Blackthorn from fortress to something approaching community, not through grand gestures, but through incremental choices, listening to servant concerns, adjusting policies, refusing to accept that hierarchy required cruelty. Adrian watched her work and felt something he'd thought died with Rosalie. Not love exactly, not yet, maybe not ever in the same way, but recognition. The understanding that partnership didn't require perfection. It just required two damaged people choosing to face their damage together instead of alone. They grew closer slowly, testing boundaries through careful conversations and shared silence. Evelyn was cautious in ways that spoke to her own trauma, her own history of powerful men who'd betrayed trust. Adrian understood. He'd spent 9 years learning that vulnerability was just another word for target. But gradually, incrementally, they built something. Not romance in the traditional sense, something stranger and more honest. A relationship based on surviving hell together and choosing to stay even when escape was possible. 6 months after the execution, Adrian found Evelyn in the East Wing library where Rosalie's letter was now displayed in a glass case. A memorial, a testament, proof that one woman's courage had eventually brought down an empire of lies. Evelyn stood before the case, reading words she'd probably memorized. Adrian approached quietly, giving her space to process whatever emotions the letter evoked. "Do you think she'd approve?" Evelyn asked without turning. "Of what we've done? What we're building?" Adrian considered. Rosalie had been fierce and principled and unwilling to compromise when truth was at stake. She'd also been kind, generous, capable of seeing potential in broken things and believing they could be repaired. "I think she'd tell us we're doing our best. That's all anyone can do. Is it enough? It has to be." Evelyn finally turned to face him. Her expression was soft, vulnerable in ways she rarely allowed. "I'm afraid," she admitted, "of carrying this much, of building something that could be destroyed. Everything can be destroyed." Adrian closed the distance between them. "That's not a reason to avoid building, isn't it?" "No. It's a reason to build carefully and protect fiercely and accept that loss is always possible, but connection is worth the risk." He reached out slowly. Evelyn met him halfway, their hands intertwined with the ease of practice, the comfort of familiarity earned through surviving disaster together. "I need you to know something," Adrian said quietly. "What I feel for you, it's not replacement, not me trying to resurrect Rosalie through someone else. I know. It's also not just gratitude or trauma bonding or any of the logical explanations we could apply. Then what is it?" "I don't know yet." Adrian's honesty was absolute. "I just know it's real. And I know I want to find out what it becomes if we give it time and space and patience." Evelyn studied his face for a long moment. Then she smiled, something genuine and fragile and brave. "All right, we'll figure it out together." She leaned up and kissed him. The contact was soft, careful, weighted with all the damage they both carried. Not passionate, not desperate, just honest. An acknowledgement that two broken people could choose each other without pretending the breaks didn't exist. When they separated, Adrian felt something in his chest that might have been peace, or the beginning of it. The recognition that healing wasn't about erasing scars, it was about learning to carry them without letting them define everything you built going forward. The official ceremony recognizing James as heir took place on a warm day in late June. Nobility gathered in Blackthorn's renovated ballroom, the same space where Adrian had exposed the conspiracy 9 months earlier. But the atmosphere was different now, less oppressive. The weight of secrets had lifted, replaced by tentative optimism that maybe, possibly, things could actually improve. James stood at the center of the room in formal attire, looking simultaneously tiny and impossibly brave. At 9 years old, they were about to be recognized as one of the wealthiest heirs in England. The responsibility should have been crushing. Instead, James faced it with Rosalie's courage shining through. The Lord Chancellor read the proclamation officially restoring James's rights and legitimacy. Lawyers presented documents proving lineage. Witnesses testified to the truth of parentage. Every step was formal, procedural, designed to prevent any future challenge to the inheritance. When it was done, when James was officially recognized as heir to Blackthorn and all its holdings, the room erupted in applause. Not everyone was sincere, aristocratic politics never died completely, but enough people were genuinely moved that the moment felt real. Adrian watched from the side, his shoulders still aching in cold weather but functional, his heart simultaneously full and empty. This was what he'd fought for, what Rosalie had died trying to protect, and it had finally, impossibly, actually happened. James found him after the ceremony, still wearing their formal clothes but with the wig discarded because it itched. "Thank you," the child said simply, "for everything." Adrian knelt despite the protest from his healing body. "You don't need to thank me. Your family. This is what family does." "Is it?" James's expression was skeptical beyond their years. Most families don't risk their lives. Most families don't spend 9 years fighting conspiracies. Then most families are doing it wrong. Adrian pulled James into a careful embrace. "You deserved this. Your mother deserved justice. And I deserved the chance to finally make something right." They held each other in the emptying ballroom while servants cleaned champagne glasses and removed decorations. Two people bound by blood and trauma and the fierce determination to build something better than the wreckage they'd inherited. Eventually, Evelyn appeared to collect James for the reception dinner. She rested her hand on Adrian's shoulder as she passed, a gesture of comfort and connection. They'd progressed beyond careful boundaries into something more integrated. Not married, neither was ready for that kind of formal commitment, but partnered in ways that mattered more than legal documents. That night, after James was asleep and the guests had departed and Blackthorn settled into quiet, Adrian found himself back in his study. The same room where this had begun, where he'd first confronted Evelyn about the letter, where he'd spent 9 years drowning in guilt and grief. But the room felt different now, less haunted. The ghosts had finally released their grip, satisfied that justice had been served, and the living were honoring the dead through action instead of paralysis. Adrian poured himself whiskey and stood at the window watching moonlight paint the garden silver. Somewhere out there, Rosalie was buried in the family plot with a new headstone that told the truth about her death. Murdered, not accidentally fallen. The words were harsh but honest, a refusal to let comfortable lies smooth over brutal reality. He raised his glass to the moonlit gardens, to ghosts and justice and surviving long enough to see both honored. Then he drank and felt the burn all the way down, sharp and clarifying. The door opened without knocking. Evelyn entered carrying her own glass, moving with the easy familiarity of someone who belonged in his space. She joined him at the window and they stood together in comfortable silence. "What are you thinking about?" she asked eventually. "How strange it is to win." Adrian's voice was quiet. "I spent so long expecting to lose that victory feels unfamiliar. Wrong, somehow. That's trauma talking." "Probably, but also truth." He turned to face her. "I don't know how to live without the fight. Don't know what I am when I'm not barely surviving. Then we figure it out together." Evelyn's expression was gentle but firm. "We learn how to be people instead of weapons. We practice being happy instead of just not dying. And we fail a lot because neither of us knows how this works. That's a terrible plan. It's the only plan we have." Adrian smiled despite himself. "When did you become the optimistic one?" "When I realized that surviving you was harder than dying would have been, so I might as well commit to the difficult path." She kissed him then, whiskey warm and solid and real. Not the careful testing of months ago, but something more certain. A choice made and remade, practiced and refined through months of learning each other's damage. When they separated, Adrian rested his forehead against hers and felt something fundamental settle in his chest. Not completion, people weren't puzzles missing pieces, but connection. The recognition that being broken didn't preclude being whole in different ways. "Come to bed," Evelyn said softly. "Tomorrow, we start figuring out what peace looks like. Tonight, we just rest." They left the study together and climbed the stairs to quarters they'd slowly begun sharing. Not in grand romantic gestures, but through incremental choices. Her books appearing on his shelves, his clothes folded among hers. The gradual integration of two separate lives into something shared. Sleep came easier now. The nightmares hadn't stopped completely, but they'd lost their teeth. Adrian still woke, sometimes gasping, still heard Rosalie's voice echoing through darkness, still felt Cedric's hands around his throat in dreams that insisted the past wasn't actually past. But Evelyn was there, solid and warm and real. A reminder that survival meant building forward instead of drowning in memory. And in the morning, James would wake and need breakfast and attention and all the ordinary demands of a child who deserved ordinary life despite extraordinary circumstances. This was what healing looked like. Not dramatic transformation, not complete erasure of damage, just the slow accumulation of ordinary moments that proved life continued despite everything trying to stop it. 5 years passed. James turned 14, brilliant and complicated, carrying trauma that would probably never fully heal, but learning to work around it. They studied law and history and mathematics with the intensity of someone who understood that power required knowledge. The child who'd spent their first 9 years hidden was becoming a person who refused to hide from anything. Evelyn and Adrian married quietly in a ceremony attended only by close friends and loyal servants. Nothing grand or performative, just two people choosing formal commitment after years of informal partnership. The vows they wrote themselves focused on honesty and survival and refusal to let damage dictate their future. Blackthorn continued its transformation. The East Tower became a center for education, offering schooling to children whose families couldn't afford tutors. The conspiracy's hidden wealth, money Cedric had stolen and hoarded, was redirected toward fixing systems that had enabled the abuse. Not charity. Justice in the form of resources returned to people they'd been stolen from. It wasn't perfect. Nothing involving humans ever was. But it was better. Measurably, demonstrably better. And better was enough. On the 5th anniversary of Cedric's execution, Adrian visited Rosalie's grave alone. He brought white roses, her favorite, and stood in morning mist reading the headstone that told uncomfortable truths. "I kept my promise," he said to the stone, to the memory, to whatever remained of the woman he'd loved. James is safe. Thriving, growing into someone you'd be proud of. The people who killed you paid, and Blackthorn is becoming something other than a monument to cruelty. The words felt inadequate. 9 years of guilt couldn't be absolved through simple report. But Adrian had learned that guilt wasn't about absolution. It was about carrying responsibility without letting it destroy you, about honoring the dead through choices made by the living. "I love Evelyn," he continued. "It's different than what we had, but it's real. And I think you'd approve. I think you'd tell me that moving forward isn't betrayal." Wind rustled through cemetery trees, birds called in the distance. The morning was ordinary and beautiful in ways that felt like answer enough. Adrian placed the roses on the grave and turned to leave. Evelyn waited at the cemetery gate, giving him space but refusing to let him face ghosts entirely alone. Beside her, James studied grave markers with the focused intensity they brought to everything. "Ready?" Evelyn asked as he approached. Adrian glanced back one more time at Rosalie's headstone. Then he took Evelyn's hand and reached for James with the other. "Yes. Let's go home." They walked together through morning mist back toward Blackthorn, 3 people bound by survival and choice, and the stubborn refusal to let tragedy have the final word. Behind them, the dead rested easier, knowing the living had finally learned to carry their memory without drowning in it. And in the palace that had witnessed so much violence and pain, life continued its messy forward momentum. James studied. Evelyn managed. Adrian learned slowly, painfully, to forgive himself for being human instead of perfect. Some days were harder than others. Anniversaries brought ghosts. Winters reminded Adrian of the night Rosalie died. James struggled through periods of depression and anger that no amount of therapy fully resolved, but they endured. Not through some magical transformation that erased damage, through the daily choice to keep building despite knowing that everything they built could be destroyed, through accepting that healing was lifelong work instead of destination, through understanding that broken people could create beautiful things if they refused to let their breaks define everything. Years later, when James reached majority and formally assumed control of the Ravenshire holdings, they threw a ball that filled Blackthorn with music and laughter and joy that felt earned instead of performed. Adrian watched from the edge of the ballroom, silver now threading through his dark hair, his shoulder aching in ways that reminded him of the price paid for justice. Evelyn found him in his usual corner, carrying 2 glasses of champagne and the sardonic expression that meant she was about to say something cutting and true. "You look contemplative," she observed. "Should I be worried?" "Just thinking about how strange it is to survive, to actually make it through instead of dying in the attempt. Regretting any of it?" Adrian looked at James holding court in the center of the ballroom, confident and capable and alive. Looked at Evelyn, his wife and partner, and the person who'd chosen to stay when leaving would have been easier. Looked at Blackthorn transformed from prison into something approaching home. "No," he said finally, "not a single moment. Even the pain? Especially the pain. Without it, we wouldn't have earned what came after." Evelyn raised her glass. "To earning it the hard way, then." They drank together as music swelled and dancers whirled and life continued its relentless forward march. And in the center of the ballroom, James laughed, genuine and unguarded, the sound carrying through ancestral halls that had heard too much grief, and finally, were learning to hold joy instead. This was the epilogue 9 years of fighting had earned. Not perfection, not the erasure of trauma, just the messy, complicated, beautiful reality of people who'd survived hell and chosen to build something better in its aftermath. The ghosts were quiet now. The battles were won. And Blackthorn Palace, once a monument to secrets and suffering, had become a testament to the stubborn human refusal to let darkness have the final word. Adrian Ravenshire stood at the edge of his family's legacy and understood something fundamental. Power wasn't about domination or control or bending the world to your will. Real power was surviving what should have destroyed you and choosing kindness anyway. It was carrying damage without weaponizing it. It was building forward despite overwhelming evidence that everything built eventually crumbles. He took Evelyn's hand and stepped onto the dance floor. They moved together through practiced steps, 2 people who'd learned to trust each other through surviving the unsurvivable. Around them, Blackthorn breathed with life instead of death. And above them, if you believed in such things, the ghost smiled and finally rested. The story that began with a dropped letter ended with a dance. Not because everything was resolved or healed or perfect, but because the people who'd fought through darkness had earned their moment in the light. And sometimes, just sometimes, that was enough.